I'll wear my strawberry earrings, you wear that smug little smile. I'll wear whatever I'm wearing and you can think what you like. You say that you like to watch how bitches fail. Talented or not, you knock the wind from our sails. Your t-shirt says the future is female, but I don't think you buy what you say. I'll wear my strawberry earrings, you wear that smug little smile. I'll wear whatever I'm wearing and you can think what you like. And when the future comes calling, I hope you fall into line. It's been a barrel of laughs in your world, welcome to mine. You've got a feminist girlfriend as though that makes you excused. I've heard the shit that you say, she is out of the room. I'll wear my jeans and my sneakers, you wear that smug little smile. I'll wear whatever I'm wearing and you can think what you like. And when the future comes calling, go find a good place to hide. It's been a barrel of laughs in your world, welcome to mine. You've got a feminist girlfriend as though that makes you excused. As though that makes you excused. I'll wear my crown and stilettos, you wear that smug little smile. I'll wear whatever I'm wearing and you can think what you like. And when the future comes calling, go find a good place to hide. It's been a barrel of laughs in your world, welcome to
Sweet. Oh, I want to see this.
Hey guys.
Hello.
All right, we're live. This is
All
exciting.
right.
So this is super exciting. I'm here at the bottom, and we're trying new stuff now. Totally new. So I'm also looking at the. All right. I see some familiar names. So Colby, hello. Josh, hello. So bear with me. It's literally the first time we're going live this way using YouTube Live. Pretty excited. Hi, Ellen. So I'm looking at the live stream like everybody else, but also we have a central comment here. So let me pull the comments and the reaction here. All right, I get here. Look, and I can even do this.
Hey.
Do we see? Oh, you know what, Ollie? We need to look sharp here. We need to look sharper. All right, Ollie looks sharper now. All right, we're doing this live. Ollie, nice. How are you? We have
Swan.
Ellen from saying hello to Philadelphia. All right.
We got Boston in the house, Berkeley.
Where is Boston? We have Josh saying doesn't tell us where he's from, where he's darling, but nice to see you. Colby, I don't know if I already pinged you, but hey, Colby, great to see you again. Hello.
That's
Love
cool.
it. Sven saying hello, Piper.
Hey guys.
It's cool. It's
Swan's
cool.
over here.
We have 1026 mastering. Hello, guys. Hello to you.
Santiago.
Hey, Jacob from Ithaca.
Jacob.
Ithaca.
Hello from Ithaca. Nice. All right, you're getting people dining in.
We
This
missed
is
you,
cool.
Jacob.
We do.
Come back.
Welcome anytime.
This is great. I love it. All right, we're gonna play a bit with this. So, my name is Loic Maestracci, the founder of Music Expo. Wow, what a year! Last year we were doing events across the United States, and now we're doing live streams, and we've done events, we've done Zoom like everybody else. We're doing this new format on YouTube, and the reason where we're experimenting something new. What we're trying to do is bring a bit the spirit of Music Expo, which is this this interactivity. Even though you're all around the world and you're chatting with us on the chat here, we can see your chat here and we can incorporate it in the live stream, so you're kind of with us. You see Acoustic Session LA. Hi guys, happy to be here. We're happy to have you. Raylin, nice to see you. Nice to see you. Yeah. So I love to meet new people this way, and I love to see familiar faces. So what we try to do today is about audio democratization, if I'm correct. And what we wanted to do is make this as accessible as possible. And this is why we decide to try YouTube Live. With me, I have mastering engineers, Papa Payne and Daniel. I apologize, but I'll try not to butcher the last name. But Daniel.
No worries.
Pacigalupi.
You got
perfect.
it.
Well done.
Yeah. If you're not familiar, they're both mastering engineer. Right now, dialing or joining us from Nashville, and they both work for Infrasonic Mastering. How you doing, guys?
Doing well.
Wonderful.
Yeah?
Thanks.
This is
Glad
exciting.
this worked out.
Pepper,
This is
before we get into
No,
it, you called me in August. You're like, I have an idea, as usual. And here we are.
Well, look, your first mistake is always picking up my phone calls. I get you into these predicaments. We've done a ton of crazy stuff. I've presented at every single Music Expo SF and several in other places. We did the first ever all analog production track at Music Expo or any modern convention that I know of. And now here we are doing these awesome little one-offs.
Yeah.
And I thought, who better than the smartest nerd and best teacher I know, my buddy Dan right here.
Oh,
That's great. and so we're figuring this out. How are we going to can you tell everybody what's going to happen in the next, in the next few minutes?
This is kind of a crazy concept because so much of, and I love that you called it audio democratization earlier, Loic, because so much of what we experience as engineers, especially coming up, and Dan and I have had a really similar upbringing through classic schooling, classical assistant, and then worked on our own clientele, and now Dan is the best teacher. And now we're basically working out of our own studios and spending time, one-on-one with clients, and we have management, and we work for a wonderful mastering firm. And that trajectory is not normal these days. And so we've both, I'm sure Dan, I'm not going to speak for Dan completely, but I think we've both experienced a lot of audio knowledge hoarding not through necessarily my mentors, but through other people that we know in the industry. And I never want to be that kind of person. I want to be the kind of person that shares knowledge, because I think that there's so much misinformation out there and so much knowledge hoarding that we can make the whole industry better, and we can make way more music overall if everybody kind of knows something about the basic concepts and understands basic audio principles, and then they can make better records. And the problem is, when you Google a simple question on the internet, you don't get a simple answer, or you might get a whole bunch of weird preferences or opinions that aren't based in fact. And so I thought, I get asked all these questions all the time, like really simple stuff that people feel safe asking me, which I love, but that are the same thing over and over. And I thought, okay, maybe the masses need to hear these answers. And so Dan and I were talking earlier this summer about maybe going online and asking these, or answering anything that people are asking. And so I stood up a little website, and people started sending us questions. And so if you have a question, you can, Loic, I'm not sure if you have it set up on the website right now, but you can go to tinystereo.com and ask the question. We'll even answer some on the air. But we got dozens of questions, all unique. And we were able to go through them, categorize them a little bit, and every single one is going to get answered. If not today, very soon in the future, because now we're getting a whole bunch more, which is awesome. It's a good
great.
problem. Do you have anything to add about any of that?
Yeah, no, and just like I really want to emphasize that this is a no stupid questions. Like there's no question that is stupid here. Like, do not feel like you'll be ostracized. Do not feel in any way that that question is dumb, because we all have gaps in our knowledge. Just the other day I was looking up something and I just didn't know what it was, and I was like, oh, everybody else in the world seems to know this already. So we just really want to definitely positive atmosphere here is what we're going for.
Yeah, safe space, and it's
Safe
all
space.
anonymous too. So we don't have any other information. Look, I don't know if you have the slide of like just the beginnings of this. When I first put up this website, I just asked for a few simple things, just a category, the question, and then a little password because I didn't want to get spam. But
we will share the link. So, so two things. For everybody here, I see we have 23 people watching. Thank you so much, and I'm sure more people will join us.
All your friends,
what I would love you to do, if we can take just a second, can you share the link, because we made it accessible to everyone? Please feel free to share it on your social media, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, and invite your colleagues, because there's going to be a lot of gems dropped in the next hour or two, or even more, until we get through the questions. So if you can all take a second and share the link. It's accessible to everybody. We ask everybody to sign up so they can get the notification, but you have done your homework, and now you have the privilege to basically be the cool kids in town or on the internet, and to share this link and invite everybody and be like, hey, it's going to be a cool experience. We're doing a live stream like everybody else, but because it's Music Expo, because it's Dan, and because it's Piper, and because it's me, we won't do a live stream like everybody else, okay? We're going to make it super special, and making special is also your contribution by sharing and inviting everybody. While you do this, I wanted to make an announcement. Most of you are familiar with Music Expo, and we do events across the United States. Of course, this year we haven't been able to do it. And November is usually the year where we do a flagship show in the Bay Area. The dates for this show is November 13 and 14. Of course, we will not be doing the event in real life, but we'll be doing it online. So I would like to ask you to mark your calendar. November 13 and 14, we have a 2-day summit, which will be online, which we don't know yet if it's going to be on YouTube Live, if it's going to be our website, if it's going to be Zoom or something else. But it's going to be interactive. It's going to be interesting. We're going to talk about plenty and diverse subjects, from music creativity to mixing and mastering, but also around marketing and promotion. There will be panels, there will be workshops, there will probably be Dan and Piper. If they not too bothered after today, have them join. So really excited. Please mark your calendar. We will also, if you're on the mailing list, you will get, because you attended today, you will get a special discount. So don't register yet. Wait for us to share a discount, because we want to award you and reward you for being with us tonight. If we have new people who just tune in, say hello. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it to you, and I'll disappear from the screen, and just let me know when I need to dial in some of your special guests. Okay? So Dan, Piper, it's on you.
Awesome. Thanks, Loic.
Thanks, Loic. This is so fun. All right. Everybody, in true Music Expo fashion, if you're able to hear us and you have if you have any issues hearing us, drop like a 2 in there, and then a 1 is like yes, good. Okay, so if we ask you a question and it's a yes or no answer, 1 is yes, good, and 2 is no, not good. All right.
Fair enough.
If you can hear us really good, drop a 1.
See if this works.
Cool. Okay, great.
We'll just assume that a 1 came
We're
through.
We're just gonna assume that 1's over here.
Shall I open up?
Okay, Drew,
Drew's
awesome.
in on it. Okay,
good. Thank you. We need feedback sometimes. We need to like feel good about ourselves.
Yeah, like true mastering engineers, we're just sitting in a room by ourselves,
shouting into a void.
Exactly. So let's get started off right away. We've kind of got some categories for the questions, and they're sort of broken into mastering questions, mixing questions, general knowledge, and career advice. Mm-hmm. So we thought we'd pull one here from career advice first. the question is, and we're going to keep all these anonymous, so we won't know who it's from, but question is, how risky is it to pursue a career in audio without any contacts in the audio world and also outside of the US?
So probably someone's asking this from outside the US,
Yep.
is my guess.
And has no audio friends.
All right.
That's a good question. Do you want to start on it?
I totally can start. So we all started without any audio contacts, right? It's just a matter of whether someone started with the support of an institution or support of a studio that they maybe got an internship or a job at. Hey, Kayla. And it's definitely a risky move no matter what, whether you have support and contacts or not. My first advice for that would just be simply to start going out to shows, of course, once it's safe, and start meeting people. And the coolest thing about what's happening now with COVID is that you can actually reach any of the really awesome people that are in the audio industry right now. They are working, but most of them are working from home. Most of them have some sort of a video or like mentorship set up, and they're doing a lot of correspondence with clients or with committees and things like that they're working on. And a lot of them are really, really eager to give advice and talk about these things. So if you want a few contacts to get started, hit us up and just maybe fill out the little question form and ask for a few places to get started. But I don't think it's that risky at all to get started without any contacts. Really.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's risky. I think what would be a little risky maybe is taking out a giant loan and building whatever you feel is the right facility for you and everything without first building a contact list. I think that is the first place to start. And also to try and practice and work as much as you can as a hobby. I don't want to say it like, don't go all in on it, but make sure it is something that you really like to do. I think a lot of people, when they first hear about what this job is, they think, that sounds really fun. That's exactly what I want. And then like, once you get to the nuts and bolts, it might not be. I'm guessing since you're here, you're probably beyond that point already and you want to do it. I would say contacting people first is the best first step.
Yeah.
Agree with Piper.
All right. How about this next one? What's the best way to transition into a career in audio or music production from a career in another field? This person says, what I personally struggle with is the confidence to take the leap. And there's some more information to that question, but that's okay. I have it right here.
That's it.
Take
Thank
the
you,
leap.
Piper.
Oh, thank you. Well, I would say that a lot of people have multiple careers, and I think about it almost like the way that I began my career was in classical recording. It's completely different than mastering. Yes, there are some shared veins, but I think there are a lot of people that start careers in audio later in life.
Yeah. I didn't personally, so I don't have necessarily good personal advice for it. But yeah, no, I think you nailed it. Yeah, honestly.
Don't be afraid. I think
you nailed it.
Yeah, I mean, even yes, things are reckless. Like, my usual advice is like, don't quit your job until you have another job lined up or another source of income lined up. Audio is very, very expensive. So a lot of people will work they have a 9-to-5 and they'll work their 9-to-5 until the point where they just can't do that anymore because it's getting in the way of their dream of being an audio engineer. And that's completely fine. As long as you're doing good work and as long as you're taking care of your clients, then you're going to be good.
This one's pretty similar to what we already answered.
Okay.
This one I like. Question is, can I be called an audio engineer without a degree in audio engineering?
Great question. Yes, absolutely.
Could not agree more. The really fun thing about being an audio engineer is really it's 100% results oriented. There's no, if you do great work and you make great sounding things, people will hire you. They don't care where you went to school or if you went to school even.
And this whole thing about going to school for audio is pretty new in the grand scheme of things. I mean, audio as a career used to be like dudes in lab coats, like trying to make sure, or union workers, like trying to make some sound of some sort on this like plastic format or on a wire. Like that was what audio was. And only in the last like 30-ish years has audio education become a business. And then people have built schools and started capitalizing on that. But studying audio and acoustics has always been like a more like academic pursuit. And yes, those people call themselves engineers, but more people call themselves engineers without that degree.
And I think it's important to stress too that unlike a lot of things, if you were an accountant and you had a CPA degree, you would likely get hired just based off of that. And that isn't really how it works in the audio world. One benefit to the schools that specifically do audio is they have a lot of contacts with engineers around to get you internships, to get you in the door. And I think that's really the big benefit of it. But the degree itself doesn't say I'm good at making things sound good. That just isn't really how it works. So, and I will say, I think there are advantages to it. And I think there are disadvantages to it. It's kind of really what works for you as to whether or not you want to pursue that.
Awesome. All right, let's keep going here because we have a ton to answer. Next question. Ooh, I like this one. Because Dan, you've got a beautiful studio full of gear and things in there that you own. The question is, we obviously all are working on different budgets, but if you have a massive wish list of equipment, how do you prioritize what you order first? Do you have a rule of thumb in something?
Rule of thumb in working with used equipment?
Working with used equipment or...
Sorry. Still figuring it out.
We're not spreadsheet engineers.
Yeah, clearly not.
Rule of thumb in working with used equipment and where do you order it from? I'm going to just take this one really quick and then you're of course chime in. So my first advice, especially as you're amassing equipment, is God, they're going to, all the manufacturers are going to hate me for this, but like, don't buy brand new stuff unless you absolutely need brand new stuff, because you don't know what it's going to be. Like my mastering console has had probably 40 different pieces of gear in it over the years. And all of them were, the things that are in it now have been there for a good 4 or 5 years because those are the things that I love. And those are the things, some of them I paid full price for, some of them I didn't. But I believe that until you really know what you want and what you are going to use for a long, long time, don't spend all of the money on it if you can find it used. There's nothing wrong with that. Most of our consoles are full of used gear. Mine
was a showpiece actually at AES and whatnot. So that's how I got it. So yeah, the other thing too is, as far as demoing things, that's very much a possibility. If you are, especially in a major city, it's easier. You have a place like Vintage King or another audio retailer that will let you literally borrow the gear, take it home, try it out, and bring it back. And that is a huge thing as well. If you were curious, just if anyone cares what my opinion is on the order of things to buy, though, I really think that I thought about this for a long time, and I think the real key is to nail some of the big stuff first. And the one that no one wants to talk about is the room. That's really the most important piece of gear that you can have. Obviously, that's not always the easiest thing to pick. You might be really limited. But then if you're in a room that's not ideal, definitely working to treat that room to make it as ideal as possible is a really good first step. And then the second piece of big gear is your monitor setup. And what I mean by that is, how are you listening to this sound? What speakers are you using? What amplifier powers those speakers? And what's sending the signal to those speakers to make it sound great? Because at the end of the day, if you aren't hearing it correctly, it doesn't matter how great you are as an engineer, you're not going to make great products because they're not going to translate out of your room. So those are kind of my two big things to start with. Then you can kind of weed in converters or EQs, but I would start with those as the main things. And my usual rule of thumb is that if it sounds too good to be true, like this is a thing that's going to solve all your problems, it probably is. Yeah. Because this is always a pursuit of perfection, is setting up a studio. And I believe that the gear and the pursuit of that, ideal sound always gets in the way of creativity and gets in the way of getting the work done. And so at some point you got to put down the tuning software, put down the, put down that latest, greatest microphone, and just, if you're a producer or working on recordings, write and record a good song
first and foremost. And then if you're a mastering engineer, learn your basics, learn critical listening. All those things can be done without a whole bunch of bells and whistles. Awesome.
This one's more of a personal one to us.
This one is a little bit more personal. I think we can both answer this.
Sure. The question is, how did you build up your mastering business? Client-wise, but also location, gear-wise. I really admire how you've made such an amazing studio and career in such a relatively short space of time. Pretty sure that's directed to Piper.
And you, 'cause we're the same age.
Well, I meant more just that it was to your website, so I think it's probably to you. But go for it. How did you build up your business?
Well, for me, I had a series of really cool opportunities to work under really, high-level mastering engineers as mentors and work as their assistant. And then when it came time to actually take that first record, it wasn't before I had worked as an assistant for like 4 solid years. And I'm not talking like, oh, I came in and shadowed, somebody for a little while. It's like, no, you're basically getting to the point where you can try and be a better engineer than the person that's teaching you. And that's always my goal. And that at that point, when I was kind of blessed with like, yes, you're good enough to do this and accept money for it, that's when I took my first client for mastering. And then that first single took me an entire month. I think I made like 20 different versions. It was a dubstep single. It was awesome. It was by my still buddy Arastu, producer out of the Bay Area. And I told him I was really straightforward. And I think that that's something that we have to remember is like, as we're coming up in our careers, you have to be really straightforward with the clients. You can't always try and be the biggest, most well-known engineer if you don't have the body of work to show for it. So if you're just really honest with people and you say, look, this is my first paid mastering job. I've mastered all of these other records at night when the mastering engineer wasn't there, or I have recorded all of these things, and this is what I think good sound sounds like. Here's my rate. It's not crazy high, but it's something. And if you will go down this path with me and this journey with me, I'm not going to stop until you're happy. I'm going to work my damnedest to give you the best product possible. And he said, okay. And so then I said, like, this is going to take me a month to get back to you. And he was like, okay, no problem.
Didn't mind.
All right.
That's
and so
awesome.
then that's what I did. And I think that that's the best way to proceed always, is just to be honest about where you're at back to you as you're building up your clientele. Okay. Did we lose something? Or?
Yeah, that was kind of weird. Sorry, some audio just sort of crept into our signal there. How about gear-wise? How did you build your gear? What steps did you take to build your gear?
So this is another fun one too. And this what Dan and I are talking about that we're coming at from mastering engineers comes from us having a well-rounded education in audio in general. So like we might say something about mastering, but it's not really all for mastering. What we're hoping to, give information about all disciplines audio wise. And so I think that when I worked with the first couple of pieces of mastering gear that I had, which was a really the best converter I could afford, which is a metric halo ULN8. And then I also had a Weiss DS1 Mark III and a Weiss EQ1 Mark III. And those are just digitally controlled analog EQ and compressor. And they are they're not digitally controlled analog. They're just digital.
Digital, right?
They're just AES in and out. But I had to convert it. It doesn't matter. Those two things helped me with my listening skills and with my mastering chops, because I was so limited to just one EQ and one compressor. Okay. And I worked really, really hard. I had to work way harder to learn that stuff. So I would say when you're building up your gear list, don't be afraid to just limit yourself, because the worst that's going to happen is that you're going to know how to use that piece of gear inside and out.
Yeah, and I'm not really a super big gear person. I only have one compressor and 2 EQs in my rack right now, as far as analog goes. And I like that. Like, just like you said, working with a limited amount of things is often very helpful, especially when you're starting out. But also, I much like you too, I started off in a big studio, a big mastering studio that had all the gear and everything already. So for the first 6.5 years that I was working in town, it was all on someone else's equipment. And what that let me do, though, was when I did leave and want to build my own mastering room, I knew exactly what I wanted and what that gear was going to be for. So I specifically found things. It wasn't even all the exact same pieces as the other studio, but things that did similar, had similar sonic qualities. And I knew that that would build a chain that would work for me. So being able to use other gear and not just having to buy it is very helpful. Kind of tags on to what we talked about before a little bit. But yeah.
Did we hit on client wise? I mean, I think the best thing to do, is always just, I always followed the principles of doing the very best work I could with the resources I had, no matter what. If I went home and felt like I could have done a better job, I wouldn't sleep that night. So it's not going to serve anybody, the client or me, if I don't do the very best job I can with the resources I have. And so other things like turn your stuff in on time. When someone is coming to you for a project, you're in the service business as an engineer, and you're gonna have to build your reputation on being able to get things back in a timely manner, better than you found them, and with good communication.
Absolutely.
It's not always about the flashy gear or like the crazy weird techniques you used. More than anything, this is a people business and it's a service. And so you have to remember those things as you're building your business. And the other thing too is like one good client experience will lead to 3 more new clients, but one bad client experience, I think, will lead to 10 missed opportunities.
That's true. Definitely.
All right, we're out of career for the moment.
We're out of career. Should we move to mastering, mixing, general recording?
Let's go recording.
Okay.
And then a little bit of mixing. And we have a couple of cool special guests that sent in some info for us. So this is kind of fun. We might be using one of those in this little set.
Yeah. These are some of the recording ones with
they are.
Reid and Michael, and then there's some up here too.
Okay. Let's do
sorry, y'all.
Let's do this one with Reid. Let's bring in Reid. This is exciting.
So a question came in specifically to rock guitars. And so the question was, can you please cue for rock guitars? It would be good to know more about getting good tone and how to find the sweet spot on guitar tracks.
Yeah.
Luckily, Reid Shippen is here in the same building as us, so we were able to just go pick his brain whenever we needed to. So without further ado, if possible,
Look, can you play the first video about rock guitars?
Hey, it's Reid. I am going to try and give hopefully not stupid answers to no stupid audio questions. So we got a couple kind of mix related stuff here, so I figured I would jump in and throw my 2 cents. So the first question, how do you EQ rock electric guitars? A lot. No. My favorite thing to do with rock electric guitars is to get a little bit of low end on them and a fair amount of bite, like crank in like 7K, and then I would push that into a compressor. I love using LA3As, the Universal Audio LA3, or real ones if you've got it. Like, I slam them into those things. Don't be afraid to turn all the knobs to the right on the limiter, and then just push 7K and a little bit of a 150 into it, and they should cut through just fine. Another great trick is using something like a Helios EQ to just kind of like push a 3.5 to 6K cut through so they get through the track. Those are 2 of the tricks that I use on electrics a lot. I've heard of this.
Reid was just walking out and we were like, come say hi, dude.
I can confirm, as I assisted Reid for a few years, that yes, all of that is exactly true on what he does for the electric guitar EQ. Stun on the LA3A. Not a joke.
Any other parting advice for our friends here in the world of the internet?
What kind of
tips like don't eat yellow snow. And...
Definitely don't eat yellow snow. Don't believe anything you hear on the internet.
Oh,
we've already addressed that.
Okay, get out of here.
including us.
This is awesome. I hope you guys are having a fun time.
We're having a blast. We're knocking through these. So it's pretty rad.
It's super cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, rock on. These guys are the best. Listen to everything they say.
Peace, Reid. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, Reid.
Stay off gear, sluts.
They're not sponsoring this video.
I feel like we're on Wayne's World.
I know, right?
This is like my ultimate dream.
Oh, that's funny.
Wait, are you Wayne?
I mean, I got the hair, I guess, right?
Well,
Yeah.
I am a drummer.
That's okay. Fair enough.
Hey,
fair
no
enough.
stairway.
Fair
Stairway
enough.
denied. All right, back to it.
Okay, back to it. So thank you, Reid. We actually got a fair number of questions about electronic music, and it's something I'm not as familiar with, but I think Piper's worked on more of it than me. So this is an interesting one. I think this is a good one. I can read it from up here.
Okay.
I work in electronic music in a style where the intention is to have sub-bass track that is supportive of the bass track. Are there recommended relative gain levels between bass and sub in this situation? Or is there okay, that's basically, it just kind of continues on that same thing. So sub bass versus bass in electronic dance music, how do you know how to balance those? It's a bit of a mixed question. But...
Okay, so this is kind of a mixed question, but if we harken back to audio physics 101 with the difference between what happens in the room as far as the amount of audio or air that's being pushed around the room, and then what your speakers can do, and then what everybody else's speakers can do, and then also what the digital, if we're working in, I'm assuming we're working in digital because most electronic music these days is produced in the digital realm.
Right.
You have a ceiling, you have a 0 point. So there is, once you get up to that ceiling of minus, or 0 dBFS, minus 0.0001 dBFS, you can't go any higher, right? And so I want you to think about the fact that in bass music that has a lot of bass, your bass, everything basically under, I don't know, maybe 120, 140 hertz is going to take up like 70% of the energy available in your dynamic range for digital audio. Okay. And I'm going to try and break that. I'm just keeping that in layman's terms as much as possible for anybody else that's working this genre. So when you want your track, in most electronic music, we want our tracks to be loud and we want them to have a lot of bass. Well, the problem is a lot of electronic music is very dense production. These days, for folks that aren't working specifically in that genre or weren't trained in that genre, they tend to pack a lot of stuff into the mix, and then you can't get. It's like the thing about a burger, like cheap, fast, good.
Yeah, you get
right?
2 of the 3.
You can have a ton of bass and sacrifice some level, and then have a dense mix. You can't have all 3. So keep in mind that a bass is going to more energy than your bass. Okay, so I think, because I love bass and I work on a lot of heavy bass music, in general, I try not to do too much filtering, but you have to be very careful about that. That's sort of know exactly, don't try this at home kind of thing. Your mastering engineer should be able to handle that for you. I like to have the bass. In electronic music, you have the impact, and then the sub bass a lot of times becomes the sustain, almost the way that like a kick drum and a bass instrument work in a rock song. So think about it that way. Your sub bass shouldn't be so overwhelming that it's filling the room or creating distortion on your speakers. Keep in mind too, if you're working on studio monitors, most of the time, these things, the little phone or the earbuds or the car, they can't replicate those frequencies anyway. So just take it all with a grain of salt. And in general, I think if it feels good, it probably is good, as long as it's not distorting.
Totally. Could
Anything
not agree
to add?
more. No, this is the one thing about the filtering too, only because there was another question about it, and I think it's something that's kind of important. A lot of people think if you put a high pass filter on something, let's say at 20 hertz, that's just going to cut everything below 20 and nothing else will change. And that is just not how it works. You can actually, if you have a track let's say the kick drum isn't giving you a ton of impact in sort of the 60 to 100 hertz range, you can add a high pass filter at around 20 to 30. And what that will actually do is put a little bump, just mathematically in the way filters work, and depending on the slope, it'll add a bump at a slightly higher frequency and may actually give you kick energy back. It might feel like it has more low end after you put a high pass filter on it. And I think it's just something to play around with. It doesn't always work, but it is a kind of a neat thing to try sometimes.
Also keeping in mind too, like I think you may have mentioned this a little bit, or maybe you're going to when we talk about phase later, but when you make adjustments in the bass in like if an EQ or a filter even, anything you're doing in that range is going to ring up in the spectrum. So when you shift when you make an EQ, you're basically taking a harmonic modulation, you're shifting the phase, you're shifting the time in order to add or subtract that frequency. But that problem is that also causes ringing and causes effects that you might not know are happening up higher, which is going to cause other phase issues and other jambliness. And I made that word up.
I like that jambliness.
Jambliness. And it's going to start to degrade your impact.
And it's important to remember that not all EQs have the same overtone structure when you do that. That's like the difference between linear phase EQs and natural phase EQs.
Yeah, you love natural phase.
I like natural phase EQs. But that's like another thing, and that's why all gear sounds different. Is it's all putting its harmonic imprint on there. So really playing around a lot is really important. I do that all the time. Sweep frequencies, like try different things, and it's definitely not like I go in there and say, oh, that just needs 0.2 dB at 80 hertz, and then it's fixed. Like it's definitely more playing than that.
Right. Okay, next one.
Do we want to do the pan one?
Let's do the pan one.
What is the furthest panning position you recommend for individual tracks in a mix? Let's say panning goes from -50 to +50 in Ableton Live, but is there a limit that you recommend for a solid mix that translates well on regular speaker systems and headphones? Even if a producer engineer created a super wide stereosphere in the mix, would a mastering engineer end up reining that in to create an optimum master that sounds good on many systems?
That's a great question.
This is a good question. I'm very opinionated about this, but I'm kind of curious to hear yours first.
Well, I'm just going to start by setting the stage for what panning actually is. So in a mix, panning is level control to the left speaker and to the right speaker. It is not taking the sound and sending it over there. The console or the computer, neither of those things know what you're sending that level out to. And in fact, in a lot of live sound situations, back before we had these really smart front of house and monitor consoles, we would use panning as level control to monitors sometimes. There was pan is just a level control to a set of output channels. Okay. So starting there, you can use panning to create depth in the stereo field, or from left to right, or from up and down if you do it right and everything's properly in phase. The problem is when you start getting into panning, if you don't do it enough, it'll start to smear the timing of what's coming out of the left speaker and coming out of the right speaker that are the exact same thing, just sending a little bit more out of this one. And if we know, anyone who's been through audio school has probably heard about the Haas effect, where that is when something comes out of one, comes from a certain direction and reaches your ear. And the same exact sound comes from another direction and reaches your ear. And when that timing is smeared by more than 30 milliseconds, they sound like two separate events. So when you are panning things, you use the same principles. You're sending the same sound from the middle out that speaker or out that speaker. And so depending on where you are in the stereo field, you're going to feel like they're coming out at different times. And so what happens is something like a fast snare drum or kick drum or a vocal starts to get smeared in time. And so you end up creating almost two separate events, and some weird shit starts to happen. Cue Dan.
Well, and the other thing too is you got to remember that a lot of things play things in mono. So like your phone, I'm not sure exactly, there's a million different phones now, but at one time the iPhones were playing either just left or a sum of left and right. And so if you have two things that you've panned, one all the way to the left and one all the way to the right, and they're playing the same parts, like let's say they're big electric guitar parts, and they're basically playing the same thing, you're going to get a bunch of phase cancellation when those sum to mono.
Right. But at least they're there.
But at least they're there. And actually, I am a firm believer. I haven't mixed in a long time, over 10 years, but also assisting Reid while he mixed. I'm a big believer in pans are either center, left, or right. I don't mess around, or I don't even see many engineers messing around with the sort of half pans. It's like, this, if you want something big in stereo, all the way left, all the way right, or right up the center to make sure you don't have any phase issues.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Let's see. What's actually doing with a video here? We haven't done a video in a second. So how about this question, which I think you grabbed the video for? How can you tell when a certain element of a song, like a kick or bass, is too loud or too quiet? What tools can you use to give that? Oh, it's not a video, it's an audio file.
This one is from Maria Lisa Ayerbe. She is a badass producer, mixer down in Florida. And she was, totally gracious and wonderful to send us a voice memo of her answer for this one.
Yeah, how can you tell a certain element in a mix is too loud?
Look, can you play that one?
Oh, yeah.
Question number 1. Is it okay if I re-record the guitar parts that are sloppy
not that one, not that one, the other one. Stop.
Question number 2. How can you tell when a certain element of a song, like a kick or a bass, is too loud or too quiet? What tools can you use to gauge this? So that depends on the genre that you're working in. If you're a mixing engineer and you're mixing for trap, for R&B, for funk, for any of those very bass and kick driven genres, then obviously they should be really loud and they should stand very close to the level of where the vocal is. But when you're mixing other genres like, let's say, Americana or folk or even some acoustic pop, kick and bass should go below the vocal, because the vocal is it's the main focus of your mix. So I don't think there are specific tools that help you gauge this. It's more about using references from other commercially released tracks that you feel that are good and represent, or maybe they have just sold millions and you feel it's a good reference mix because that is the standard of what people are used to hear. And then you should be referencing your levels to that mix or that song in order to get the balance right.
Totally.
That's awesome.
I learned something.
Yeah, right? That all makes perfect sense. And I actually asked a mix engineer friend of mine, Shani Gandhi, here in Nashville. She works on some absolutely awesome projects, but her sentiment was very similar. She said basically she only uses her ears to get levels, and just practice and experience is the way that she learned that. But one tool she does use sometimes is she does just use very basic meters that she uses every day just to see if there's something that she's missed, if there's a problem, a bunch of very low frequencies that are creeping through that you can't hear, or maybe a really high frequency that is stuck on a track that you don't notice. She said using a meter for that is great. She knows where the meter should be, but she doesn't use the meters to find the level of what it is. That's all in her ear.
I actually I learned from Sean Everett, who is a really incredible producer, mixer. He has worked with Alabama Shakes, Perfume Genius. Just Weezer, Kesha, everyone. He has done records for literally everyone. And Sean taught me how to watch waterfalls and watch the meters and see how they're bouncing, because he was like, no, we're not like mixing with our eyes, but basically if you can see the meters bouncing and that the music is doing what you're seeing the meters do, then you're probably all right. You're probably in a good spot. And a waterfall meter is just it's a full spectrum meter that's basically showing you time, frequency, and amplitude all at the same time. If you Google waterfall meter, or even Isotope Insight makes a great one. I love it. I use it all the time. So I can see the difference between like how the verse and then the chorus hits, and basically see it visualized in front of me.
I've never done that. I gotta try that sometime.
It's a very nice shortcut.
That's really cool. I like that idea a lot. Yeah.
Thanks, Johnny. and Maria.
So we could go to this one here, which I think we have another Reid Shippen video. This is Reid Shippen being asked about gain structure. So the question was really simple, and that's totally fine. Like we said, there doesn't need to be too specific. There's 1,000 ways to answer some of these, but that's good. Maybe we can talk about all 1,000. So this question was, how do you build your gain structure?
Does he think about what gain structure is?
I think let's chat about it, because I don't really remember if he exactly says what it is. But yeah, give a little.
So gain structure is just this idea that all of the elements of your chain, whether it's like a mic preamp and then maybe a compressor in line with an EQ, and then the send to tape, which would be your send to your recording, and then the recording level, and then your output trim, and then all of the things in the chain for that element, whether, it might be one microphone all the way through a chain, or it might be your mastering chain or your mixing chain. All of those things are optimized and set at the proper places to have the right signal to noise ratio. So that's what when you hear the words gain structure, that's kind of what they mean by that. And when we set up our mastering consoles every day, we run tones through the system to check to make sure that like some little gremlins didn't get in the middle of the night and swap left and right, or to make sure that there's not a tube going out on the Manley compressor. And that it also helps us to check our gain structure, because we know that there should be a certain amount of level to noise, background noise, like hiss,
right? Because
every element, even in digital, there is noise that's introduced into the chain and into the system. And so what you want is to have that noise at a certain, hopefully low enough, but acceptable and predictable level. And then their signal can be nice and hot and healthy over that, but not to the point of clipping.
Exactly. And when you're mixing something, you may, if you're mixing at a very low level, this is going to become a problem. If the level is too low, once the mastering engineer tries to gain that up and get it to a commercial level, the noise is going to come up just the same amount as all of your music. So it's really important to get a good gain structure ahead of time. I will probably let Reid explain it much better than I ever could, though.
So the question is, how do you build your gain structure? And the completely stupid answer for me is, I have no idea. I've been doing it for so long that it's not something that I think about. But you have to make sure when you're doing something that if you're pushing really hot levels into the beginning of your chain and starting to clip stuff, by the time you get through EQ and compression and all that stuff, at the end of your chain, it's going to be totally clipping, maybe even distorting, depending on how your plugins work, depending on whether they have a saturation or distortion modeler. So you need to be careful to make sure that your levels start off fairly conservative so that you've got some room to move. Remember, you can always turn it up at the end, because it's digital, there's no noise, right? So be conservative on the front end, make sure you're not clipping multiple stages, or you're gonna end up with something that's basically just a square wave in the DAW, which isn't great.
The kick.
Okay.
So
yeah,
let's
all makes total sense.
Thanks, Reid, for that. Let's do another one about the, let's do this one about the limiter on the mix bus.
Oh, I like that one. This one is one I'm very passionate about.
Go ahead, Dan.
Okay. Well, sorry.
Any of these people that have ever seen me talk before, they already know my position on mix bus limiting.
The specific question was, and it's a really good one, especially this has become something much more common since the early 2000s when limiters, yes, exactly, Music Expo knows. The question is, with a lot of digital limiters, it's become more common. Do you recommend that a mix engineer add a limiter to the mix bus, perhaps halfway through mixing a project, after most of the tracks have been saturated and EQ'd and processed, in order to get a better sense of how the final master will sound? So the question is, do you put the limiter on in order to give you a sense of how it's going to sound when it's mastered? I've received this advice from a lot of people, and they say to mix into a limiter. So I got to kind of experience this transition. I was an assistant at a mastering studio at a time when people started limiting their mixes, especially to give them to clients for approval. So mix engineers would often have a very hot mix. They'd get approval from the client, and then they'd take all their limiters off and send us the unlimited or the pre-master or whatever they wanted to call it. And
technically a master is a pre-master.
Technically a master is a pre-master. Boy, that's for another chat. But so they basically asked, do we want to put the limiter on there? We want to put the limiter on there because our clients, they demand to hear the mix loud in order to approve it. A lot of clients are going to be comparing the mix to things that are commercially released. And so if a mix engineer gives them a mix that's very low, then it does not translate to the client as they're comparing it to things like on Spotify or et cetera, wherever you're listening to your music. So a lot of mix engineers started putting limiters on to get their mixes loud, but then they know that they don't want to send the mastering engineer a super hot mix, so they take the limiters off. I think there's a really big distinction in two different ways you can do this. There are mix engineers that mix the song and then add a limiter to get it louder. And there are mix engineers who mix through the limiter. Mm-hmm. And I find that when a mix engineer mixes through the limiter, the decisions that they've made all along the way don't translate once they remove that limiter. So for example, if your limiter is doing 5 dB of gain reduction and you push the vocal up a dB and it's a dB louder now in everyone's mind, once that limiter comes off and the threshold moves down, that vocal's not 1 dB louder, now it's 5 dB louder because it's no longer hitting the threshold of what that limiter was doing. So I find that we actually ran into this problem a lot, where we get a mix and we send the master and the clients would say, hey, it's like got way less low end, or the stereo image is totally different than the mix. And we'd think, how is that possible? But it was because they had only ever heard these super limited ones that were mixed through the limiter. So my advice to make it easy on your mastering engineer is mix it, make it sound great. Then at the very end, if you need level, add the limiter and do that process with as little processing as you possibly can. Just trying to get level, not so much getting fancy EQ changes or a bunch of compression, because there's no way for us as the mastering engineer to know what you did and recreate it exactly. Yep. So that's kind of my theory on it.
And in general, if someone is mixing through a limiter or is putting something on there and they're sending that to the client, it's nice for us to know what the client's been listening to.
Yes,
so if you're sending in mixes to a mastering engineer, please just give us that reference. Doesn't mean we're going to use it. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we need it.
No, yeah, exactly.
Sometimes we need that thing called a heated mix. But in general, to just translate this back to like any audio thing, not just mastering, there's we're getting an Amber Alert. I hope everybody's okay. The thing is, like, instead of just putting something on there because somebody says to, think about why you're doing it. So if you say, I'm going to put this limiter on the mix bus, and the answer is, and the reason is because when the client listens to it in their car, I want them to be able to have it in a place that is comparable to what they're going to hear on the radio. Cool. Put it on. If you're putting a limiter on your mix bus because you think it sounds fucking rad and and when you take it off, it just, accounting for level, you always have to volume match stuff. But like accounting for level, if it makes it sound better, okay, sure. But if you're doing it because someone just said to do it, don't do that.
Yeah. And if you do it, if it sounds awesome and that's why you're doing it, give us that file and give it to us at high res, because that's what we want to work from. We want to work from whatever sounds the best.
And what you think sounds the best.
What you think sounds the best.
We're there to make you look good too.
Exactly.
All right.
Do you want to do that one?
I like this. So before we get like fully on into like some of the more technical stuff and some of the more mastering related stuff, we have a really wonderful friend named Michael Pearson Adams, and Michael is the director of education for Waves, which is a wonderful plugin company where we're actually, by the way, we're going to get into like what a plugin is even too. Like we're going to get that meta about this later on.
Nice.
But Michael PA is a great friend of mine and of the entire audio community because he's a great teacher as well. And so I asked him a couple of these questions, and I asked him to just like send us back some answers. So you might hear a question repeated when he sends his video back. But look, can you play the Michael PA video for us?
G'day, Piper and Dan, MPA here, and I am answering the question about how can you make things like kick drums or bass drums sit well in your mix, and make sure that they're heard and not overpower everything else. And this is a really good question, and there are 2 or 3 different tools that you can use for this. One of them would be plugins. In this case here, let me move my face out of the way. I can use an EQ to focus on the frequencies that I need my kick drum or my bass to sit in so that it's not cluttering anything else in the mix. And in this case, I'm cutting the low frequencies out, and then I'm pushing up around here, around the 2K mark. And then I have a little compressor that I'm using to kind of like help make my kick drum more present. So without it, sounds like this, sounds like that. If I add this processing, it sounds like that. Now without the EQ, I bring that out of the way, it sounds like a normal kick drum, but with this, it can now be heard in the mix. So that's the first way. The second way, and let's get rid of the plugin, is you also, and you really need to do this as well, you need to make sure that you are mixing at levels that are not bleeding your ears, and you need to make sure that you have a couple of VCAs so that you can pull the entire mix down, all the music relatively, or the vocals relatively, so you can actually really hear what's going on.
The world is in your eyes.
Yeah, that pretty much works for me. So that is a couple of tools. Your VCAs, listen at a low level, and then go into plugins and focus on the frequencies that your instruments are at to make sure that they're present. And don't just try and push the fader up, because otherwise you will end up with mud. Nobody likes mud. Cheers.
All right, and we're back. Dan
us
ran
is.
for refreshments for us.
Oh, it's really the most important part of audio engineering. It's good snacks.
We both had a really long day, so we're about to devolve into debauchery here in a few minutes when we start talking about physics.
Oh, no, dreadful. We need another whiskey for that. So for anyone who wants to go down the physics rabbit hole, we do have a few technical questions, and some of them I think are really important and are really going to be helpful. Which one of these? What do you think here?
All right. Let's
Have to do that,
run through bass management really quick, because I think that that's something we can get into really fast. But I think that one day when we have more questions about room tuning, we'll get super in depth about all that.
Totally.
But basically, bass management is just talking about what is happening with the speakers and what's happening with your subs and how that's interacting with the room. And there are lots of different types of systems that to do this. You can have like physical traps in your room, which are you've heard the word bass traps before. I'm sure if you've ever been on the internet and you even literally Google the word audio, the first thing that probably comes up is, let me sell you a bass trap.
Yep.
Right? The idea of trapping and diffusion and absorption, all these things are totally different and totally useful tools for tuning a room and for getting especially the bass set up right. A trap is basically something that is a cavity of some sort that accepts the long waveform of a bass note or a bass sound, and then it keeps it from coming back into the listening section. So most speaker systems in a studio are set up where you have a left speaker and a right speaker and a listening position. And the whole goal, especially in mastering, is to have the direct sound coming from the speakers, maybe what's called the first reflection, timed correctly. So it's the first thing off the wall, the side wall, the ceiling, and the floor. And then those, you're supposed to get the most direct sound to your ears and nothing else from the room, right?
Yep.
You excite the room,
Totally.
The room moves, and you have, when all these different frequencies are happening in the room, the room is filled with sound and you're getting hopefully something that's a pleasing listening experience, but mostly it's supposed to be what's coming right out of your speakers because that's the source.
Right.
Now, when we get into bass management, that's starting to get into like filters and crossovers for what's happening in the bass and treating that almost like its own little channel. Okay. So you have a left channel and a right channel and a sub or an LFE or low frequency effects channel. And the idea is that in a system, especially for film and surround composition or mixing or output, which is kind of mastering at that point, you're treating the bass differently than you're treating the rest of the stuff. Is that a good start?
It is. Yeah, no, it's exactly right. And it's important to, I think a lot of people think that when they first build a surround setup and they see 5.1 and they're like, oh, there's a low frequency channel that sends all of the low frequency information to the sub. That's actually not really how it works. The LFE channel is a low frequency effects channel, and specific elements are sent to there. But also the bass management system is going to, let's say, take everything going to all the speakers below 200 hertz and move that to the subwoofer. The reason that works and is helpful is it, one, frees up a lot of room on those smaller speakers. They're not having to work as hard and create so many low frequencies. But also, really low frequency waves are huge, like many feet long. And your brain can't discern direction on very large sound waves.
125 hertz is like 12
feet. Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah. And so it's like you can, woohoo! Someone's going to fact check us and we're going to have a big old X on our faces. But the cool thing about that is you can put the sub anywhere and you'll have good bass response and it won't feel like very disjointed. It won't feel like it's coming from another direction. So that's like an important element of it too. And I also, just to the other thing about the room bass management, what I think is kind of cool, and I don't think that many people know, is the way that things actually absorb sound. People like to say like it gets absorbed, but that's not really what happens. It's a, it's a physical world and there's a conservation of energy. So whenever a bass wave or any sound wave hits a surface, it is interacts and makes friction, which becomes heat. So what you're actually doing when you absorb bass waves is you're converting acoustical energy into physical heat. And that's how those surfaces work. So one cool trick you can do as to knowing whether something, well, this doesn't work 100% of the time, but if something's going to be pretty good at absorbing sound waves, if you run your finger across it and it's like got a lot of friction and kind of burns your finger, like insulation would or carpeting would, that will absorb more sound than something hard like a floor, which is going to reflect.
Or my mix, which is fire.
Exactly.
And also it's yes, it's about converting energy. It's also about redirecting energy too. So like some of the really cool tools that we have even for some of the cool tools we have for even like in hi-fi setups, like the amount of engineering and cool things that go into that stuff is pretty crazy. Like I have these crazy little they're like these little feet. They're called strange attractors, made by my buddy Alan Perkins, who owns Spiral Groove. And they have like, they're shaped like this. And they're also shaped exactly like that on the inside. And so the energy comes in and half of it is carbon fiber. Half of it is carbon, half of it is aluminum, something like that. And the energy comes in at a certain angle and then it bounces back at 90 degrees and then
opposite
this way and that way and that way.
That's
and
like
that
a
way.
diamond shape.
Basically, it just does this thing where it just like works itself into oblivion.
That's interesting.
It's awesome.
Huh. That's really clever. There's some really clever stuff out there now for audio too.
All right, next question.
One of the most fun parts.
More tech stuff.
More tech stuff. Okay,
you want to do the big one?
Do you want to suffer through that one?
No, let's suffer through that one. No, I'm just kidding.
This one?
That's the one I said, but we should suffer through that one. Let's eat our vegetables.
Let's eat our vegetables. So one of the great questions, and as a mastering engineer, we get this question all the time, but what is dithering?
Really, dither means to go from one side to another. Like how we just try to decide, should we use this question or we use that question? Or should we use that question or that question? We are literally dithering on the idea of picking dither.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Yeah, the whole point of dither, the reason it exists is, I think that's actually the best place to start. And that is because the reason dither exists is when you're trying to go from a higher bit depth to a lower bit depth, the computer is going to have to round.
Hold on.
Sorry.
Bit depth.
Bit depth. Oh,
Let's start there. Okay, so sample rate is the amount of times your converter is taking a snapshot of the analog audio that's coming into the system per second. And it is converting that into digital ones and zeros. Now,
it's essentially making a reading every time.
It's taking like a little little pulse,
I'm here
like
now.
boop, 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 right? Okay, and it's saying this is a value for that snapshot. Now, the bit depth is how much information is stored in that value. And the normal recording bit depth that we have these days is 24-bit. Hopefully everyone's working at 24-bit. Some people are working at up to 32-bit, which is awesome. Please, at this point, most of our computers are working at a good enough speed to be not recording at 16-bit or MP3 even. So starting at 24-bit, what happens is for every one of those snapshots and all of that resolution that's stored in those values, the computer is coming up with ways of describing that sound. So when you look in your Pro Tools or in your Logic or in your GarageBand and you see this little stepped waveform, if you zoom in way far enough, you see that it's actually stepped. So that's the computer making a decision about where to put the value of it being a 1 or a 0, a positive or a would it be positive or negative, or just
it would be
an on or off value of that of that particular amplitude, frequency, stereo space, all of that stuff, right? Did I miss anything?
No, I think that's right.
Okay. So when we are working in 24-bit, the computer has, actually I should go backwards because 16-bit is to 24-bit is much more impressive. So working at 16-bit, you have a value that the computer is trying to describe. So for every one of those samples, the computer's trying to describe it. And in 16-bit, the computer has 65,536 ways of describing that one sample. Okay? When you go to 24-bit recording, your computer actually has 16.777 million ways of describing that one sample. So the amount of information that we are now using to describe the reverb cue, when I click my fingers and we hear the sound bounce off that corner, the amount of resolution that the computer would be able to describe that sound is so magnified, like just exponentially, literally exponentially. So here's where Dan comes in. Dan's trying to tell you now how the computer takes this massive, beautiful sound portrait in 24-bit and then spits it out at 16-bit, which is actually CD resolution.
Exactly. So you basically have to take something that is that big, awesome portrait, and you have to somehow downsize it and round all of those values that it decided on. Like, let's say it had millions of values, and then all of a sudden it's like, well, not only have a few tens of thousands, we're going to have to literally pick a spot for each one. It's kind of like building a house, measuring everything in millimeters, and then handing the construction guy something and it only has inches to measure, right? You're going to have to try and guess where a lot of these values are. At really high volumes, it doesn't make a ton of difference, especially in modern recordings. Once you're all really close to 0 dB full scale, there's not a ton of difference between the different volume levels. But when you start to get very quiet during fade outs, during reverb tails, those are where you're going to start to get some discrepancies of, well, this value was higher than this one, and this one was higher than that one. And the computer has to do some guessing. So let's visually look at this. And what I'm going to show you first, if Loic's got them ready, is an original 24-bit signal of a sine wave. So for those of you that haven't used isotope before, what this is showing you here is it's a spectral representation of audio. This is one wave with a left and a right channel. So when you see the orange bar going from left to right, that the top orange bar is the left channel, the bottom orange bar is the right channel, and you have time on the bottom. So if we were to play this, this is just a picture, but if you were to play this, the cursor would move from left to right and you would hear a tone. Now, the orange is the intensity of the sound. The more orange something is, the louder those frequencies are. Oh, I should have said frequency is up and down. So time is on the bottom, and frequencies are from low to high on the graph. So you can see this is a one.
You're pointing at it, but they can't.
Oh, they can't see me pointing. They can't even see me. Sorry. You can see this is a 1 kilohertz wave, and what it's actually doing is fading out slowly. The original one is getting quieter. So now, if we look at this is 24-bit. If we look at what happens if we just what's called truncate this, or just chop it down to 16-bit with no dither, let's see what that looks like. Okay, so what's kind of interesting here is you see that the orange line has now become many orange lines. And what those other orange lines are overtones, which are not actually in the signal. That is the computer guessing and doing some of that rounding incorrectly.
Not desired.
Not desired. On the right-hand side, you can see another graph that shows basically frequency across the bottom. So the tallest blue spike is our sine wave, and then all of the other spikes are the overtones that the computer is incorrectly guessing as values. You will actually hear this as kind of a sawtoothy sort of wave. And the other interesting thing is you can see there's a yellow marker where the orange bars just stop. That is actually at minus 96 decibels full scale. So at that point, the computer can, that's the minimum amount that you can do at 16-bit. So that point, the computer is just giving up and saying there are no more values below this. So this would not sound particularly great played if it's a very quiet signal, but if we turned it up really loud, it would sound disjointed, it would sound buzzy, might even skip a little bit. But what we would do to fix this is what's called dither. And it's a really weird process that involves just adding noise to the signal. It's very low level. It's around minus 70 decibels full scale at 16-bit. So it's very, very low in volume. And now what you can see is that the line itself is by itself again as just one single line. And we've lost all of that problem above. I actually read something really interesting researching this a little bit that said dither doesn't mask things. You'll hear people say that dither masks problems. It doesn't. It actually fixes them, which is very strange.
Because the randomness of the noise causes phase cancellation, actually undoes the problem.
Undoes the problem, exactly.
Yes, thank you.
Undoes. Oh, I think undoes is a good word though. And you can see that the signal actually keeps going past that minus 96 decibel thing. Dither actually lets you get 16-bit audio down to about minus 120 dB full scale.
So you get more,
like 24 dB
range.
more
Yeah.
Dynamic range. The other thing you'll notice though is that there is more orange overall on this screen. So your signal to noise ratio has become smaller. Introducing noise will always be will always be there, right? And it's going to lower the ratio between the signal and the noise. Dither, by the way, is just across the spectrum. There are different EQs that are applied to it. A fun thing, if you want to hear dithers, you can do this. If you have any plugin that does dither, just put it on a track and then add a whole bunch of gain plugins after it and just turn it up. And eventually, it won't take many, maybe 3 or 4, and you will hear exactly what the dither does. And it's kind of fascinating. You can try different EQs, different noise shaping, they call them. And you can hear what the different dithers actually sound like. So
wasn't there a question about
which
choosing
dither is
dithers,
best?
which dithers are best?
Which
Okay,
dither
so
is best?
The dither that's best is the one that is the most, fixes the problems, because unfortunately, when you don't dither stuff and the computer has to make those choices, I think you said this, but I want to just highlight it again. When the computer has to make those choices about a value and it does not, it doesn't make the right choice, it ends up sounding like a tick or just a not a good sound, right? We've all at some point, now that we're in the digital age, we all understand that the computer or the device, whatever the thing is, doesn't understand anything unless we give it an input, right? And so when we don't give the computer an input or don't give the computer we don't tell the computer how to make that choice, it literally just spits out nothing, which a lot of times sounds like pop, click, noises, nasty shit that we don't want. So The best dither, I think, is the one that gets rid of those undesirable sounds. But we do have some rules of thumb of places to start. Power dither.
Power seems to be really great.
Power 1, power 2, power 3. If I remember correctly, let me get this right. Don't fact check me on this, but I'm pretty sure. Power 1 is often used for dialogue. Power 2 is often used for very, very dense material like metal and loud shit. Power 3, I have found works best for classical and high dynamic range, generally higher frequency content as well with more space. So those are the power dithers. POW, you'll see POWR 1, 2, 3. You also see triangular dither, sometimes called TP diff. That's the one that is most of the time good to go.
Yeah,
like
always sounds good.
It's never really wrong. It's like a cheeseburger.
Yeah.
You just always, you can't really do a bad job with it. But when you're into mastering, you really need to know the difference between these dithers, because one day you will have to make a choice. There's another one called M-Bit Plus, which is a style of dither. I like to call them flavors, actually.
Ooh.
Flavors of dither, because I don't think of them as EQ'd necessarily, and I don't think of them as as a certain sound or whatever. I just think that they're the better, more flattering flavor for that music.
Yeah, I would agree.
M-Bit is a flavor of dither that was created that Isotope and a few other companies have licensed along the way. Some of these dithers, by the way, like when you see M-Bit in Isotope, don't quote me on this, but I don't think Isotope made it themselves. They licensed it because M-Bit actually came well before Isotope existed. And then there is another one. You could just do what's called truncate, and sometimes that's not dither at all. It's just literally no dither, which doesn't, sometimes for some things sounds fucking awesome. And it's not, again, it's like not really the right or wrong way to do it. It's just, there's another one called Good Hertz.
Yeah.
That's the one that's in the Architect Myriad software.
I've never heard
Those are all the dithers that I know of right now.
You can also apply them in real time too. Some converters
you can check
will do
them,
them,
and you can listen to them as you go.
Yep. So that's kind of, but I think I think we kind of nailed that as deep as, at least my brain can understand it. So let's see. I
think some more nerdy stuff would be really cool. Maybe, I like this one about the untreated room. We kind of hit that though. I gotta say, we kind of answered. I'm gonna read the question and just say I've been trying to mix on speakers at home. My room is untreated, and I think that's making it harder to get a good mix. How do I figure out what changes to make in my room? Well, first is you got to make sure that your speakers are actually in phase, and maybe that'll come to our next question. When you are working in an untreated room, like, that's cool. That's completely fine. Actually, I have a studio in the downstairs of my house, and it is 100% untreated. But I've gone through and I've made sure that at the very least, the speakers are in phase, they're in the right place in the room. And from there, humans are incredibly adaptable. Like, we can hear through problems in a room if you just train your ears enough. You listen to enough good content and learn what that sounds like. Like, if you listen to a record that Dan's mastered that sounds fucking awesome everywhere else, and you just learn what it sounds like in your room, then you can understand that, like, okay, maybe my room has a little too much 200 hertz because Dan's master sounds like it has too much 200 hertz.
Yeah.
And if you can use good source content and from trusted places, you can get over that hump of like hearing the room. And if you just spend enough time in it, you'll be okay.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And Colby Gustafson back in the chats had it exactly right. And you just said this, but references are key. Mm-hmm. Listen to things that people all agree sound great, or things that you think sound great, and literally try to mimic it. I mean, obviously not every song is the same, but there are certain elements from references that you can do. I still do it all the time.
Every day.
In fact, when we start talking about loudness and mastering, I'm going to mention more about that. But yeah.
So I said the P word.
What was the P word?
Phase.
Oh.
Phase. Or
is it polarity? Sorry.
polarity is just a phase.
Okay, sorry.
We don't have any. No one's laughing at our
I
jokes.
know, right?
'cause
It's just it's like every
Okay.
day here.
Oh my God.
Um,
So I said the word phase, and that's a thing that obviously is pretty important
it
because
is, and
everything
it gets
in music
thrown
is
around
timing.
a lot.
Yeah. So I'm going to put my own question here. which
Okay,
is,
deal.
Dan, this is not a stupid audio question, I hope. Can you explain to me what phase is when we're talking about timing in music?
In general, you mean? So I can answer this a few ways, but a huge part of it is going to be where you are physically listening to music. But
Yes.
let's assume you're in a room and the speaker setup is good. What phase is referring to is the timing at which audio waves arrive at you. So, and also where in their amplitude and in their actual wave form are they?
Hold on. Let's back up for a second.
Okay.
So waves.
So sound is a wave.
Sound is a wave. So sound, I say a word from here.
Yeah.
And the sound, the air molecules go straight to your ears.
They do not
They
do
do
that.
not.
That's not how they work.
So
That's how
I
light
say a
would work.
word.
Yeah.
I say a word,
Correct.
and the sound molecules bump up against each other
Correct.
and transfer the energy to each other
Correct.
next to them, and then reach the sound molecules that are right next to your ears.
Exactly.
Yes.
The sound itself does not travel through space. As far as the molecules themselves do not travel through space.
I think that's something really, really important to understand.
It is really important. In general, if you're really feeling nerdy, I would watch some videos on pressure waves in general, because it will help you understand audio a lot more.
I concur, but will also add that if you want to know more about how sound travels through space, look at a mother-loving slinky.
Yeah, that's actually a really
You
good.
hold one end of the slinky,
Yeah.
and the other end is the other molecule, and you pull it down and you let it go, and it just does this.
Yes, compression and rarefaction.
Okay. And what happens when we say compression rarefaction, we don't mean that the sound is like this massive shockwave that's now like sent through the room and then coming back and is like completely changed the dimensions of the room, because it's all stuck in the room, right? It's the energy is just transferring in harmonic modulation. So one molecule stays mostly at rest until it's agitated, and it moves this way and then that way and then that way, and then until it's back to its equilibrium, but it's bumping up against the other molecules right next to it.
So to go back to what is phase,
Yes.
that helps us explain it, because what it means is that the molecules right next to our ears are going to be doing the same thing. When the molecule from next to this ear is going in, so is the molecule from this ear. So our ears hear the same thing. Pressure in, out, in, out, in, out together. If something is not quite phase aligned correctly, you might get something like this, where one molecule is pushing one eardrum in. So this would actually be a completely out of phase or out of polarity. But when this happens, it's kind of a weird phenomenon. I've described it as it feels like there's a hole in your head and that the audio is almost coming out of your ears. But that's basically what's happening, is that waves are not arriving at you at the same time in the same part of their rarefaction and compression. What was the actual question about phase though?
Well, we have a video to play about phase coherence in a mix, but I thought we should just address what phase is when we're talking about that.
And so in general, things are going to sound like they have more impact. They're going to sound more, full is a word that gets used a lot. Round is a word that gets used a lot.
And when we say phase cancellation, what we really refer to is the time that the first waveform goes and hits up against the next one and pushes. If they're both in the same frequency and hit at the same time, they will double in amplitude. So they will move twice as far forward and back, or compressed and rarefacted. If they are at the same frequency, but exactly out of time, they will not move at all. So that's what we refer to as phase cancellation. And that's what, when you feel like your ears are popped, like we call it, I mean, one way is just an absence of sound, but you can hear it best like with comb filtering, things like that over time. Like comb filtering is a good way to explain it. Do you remember so we grew up at the same time, probably. Did you ever watch?
It's a good time.
Did you ever watch Nickelodeon?
Oh yeah, all the time.
So when some of the game shows on Nickelodeon would play, and they would cut back to the audience.
Yeah,
right.
With the cheering.
So they were cheering, right?
Right.
But you had the host.
Yeah.
Still, his mic was still open.
On. Yep.
Right. And you had the audience.
Yep.
And their mic was now up and open.
Yep.
And that timing from the host on stage to the audience is now the sources are comb filtering against each other.
Yep.
And so if anybody remembers what that sounded like, that's comb filtering, and that is crazy weird face cancellation over time.
It's very weird. I can't think of any way to describe it, but yes, that's exactly what the sound sounds like. It's almost like, to me, it's like it sounds like you're in an empty hole of a room. Like there's nothing coming off the walls, right? The room itself is almost non-existent, and it feels like you're sort of listening to everything in this weird open space. But that's exactly what it sounds like. Yeah. Huh. Interesting.
Anyway, back to music.
I mean, I'd like to talk about Guts and Legends of the Hidden Temple all night long.
Silver Monkeys all day.
Oh, really? I was a Blue Barracudas myself. But what video do we have about Phase, though? Is that from Reid?
That's Reid's video.
So, yeah, actually, I think that's a good one.
So Reid's always good at bringing it back to the music, which I love about him.
He is.
So let's ask Loic to play Reid's.
Okay, so the question was, how do you deal with phase issues during tracking, during mixing? I was actually just doing this on this song. I check everything always. I bring up the overheads. I check the kick drum against the overheads, flip the phase in and out. Same with toms, snare, rooms, even separate microphones. You always have to be listening. There is one that's going to sound full and it's going to have impact, and there's one that's going to sound either less full, or the transient doesn't hit as hard, or it sounds a little bit scooped, and it really is just trial and error, and it has a lot to do with where the microphones were placed and all of that. You also want to take a look at whether when your kick drum hits and your speaker cone is moving out, when the bass guitar hits, that the speaker cone is also moving out, because if you got one going this way and one going that way, you get them it cancels out. So that's a real easy check. You can do it with a plug-in phase meter. And I let me add this: the people who line up room mics and overhead mics and use all of this correction stuff, that never sounds good to me. It's good to have some slop in there. That's what makes it kind of wide, but you just have to make sure that the impact is hitting correctly. And I do it all by ear. There is no rule.
Your head.
That's
and we're
Shippen.
Back. Thanks, Reid.
He's very enthusiastic all the time.
Mm-hmm. So we were just trying to decide where to go next with this, and I think it's really fun to stay on some of this tech stuff. We are going to have to hit some mastering questions because we got a whole bunch of those eventually.
We did.
But why don't we stay in the zone of audio theory? Marco, you're going to have to ask Loic if he can replay this. I don't know. Maybe a little bit of audio theory, some stuff about DAWs and plugins and things.
I like that.
We have this question about, the question is, what is Slate?
Yeah, so all the questions said, what is Slate?
Now, Slate is a type of igneous rock, I believe.
That's actually, sorry, not to stop where we are right now, but this comment that's up from Josh is really good. That is actually a very good way of describing it. Yep. It's almost like the sound is around you or coming out of you, but it's not going into your ears, and you can physically tell. I mean, it is, that's what's happening, but it doesn't feel like that to your brain.
Mm-hmm. It's basically like the way that Catherine's voice sounds when she's asking me to take out the trash.
Just gonna drink,
and I'm doing something else.
So, but Slate, what is Slate?
Well, I was giving you a snarky answer.
Oh, you were? Oh, I'm sorry. I got distracted by Josh.
I actually weirdly think that the real answer is much more snarky.
Really?
All right. Slate is dragon tattoos. No, wait, dragons and tribal tattoos. No, wait, that's wrong.
It's not far off.
Okay. Slate is there are a lot of companies that make analog devices and software devices and interfaces for those analog and software devices that help translate those things. UA, everyone's heard of Universal Audio, is one of those. Slate is one of those. Steinberg is one of those.
Waves is one of those.
Waves is one of those. And
FabFilter
does not make a hardware thing.
Oh, they don't make a hardware thing. You're right. That's true.
Pro Tools is one of those, or Avid. And these are things that help the user, like the engineer, interact with the computer in a better way. And Slate is one of those companies that has done an incredible job of this. Mm-hmm. They've made it really ergonomically useful. They've made it for the most part. I as a mastering engineer, I don't interact with Slate stuff pretty much at all.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever owned anything, but I do know people that work for the company or have for years, and I've learned all about this. And I know a lot of the masters that we work on come from Slate products,
mixing world especially too,
right?
Yeah.
But Slate is one of those companies just like that makes stuff for us to do music production with. And Slate in general, there's a guy named Steven Slate that owns the company. And Slate in general is known for this thing called, well, there's the mic, there's the microphone that emulates all of these other mics, which is super cool. Dan's gonna look it up.
The VMS
ML1. Okay. So that one is a piece of hardware that will emulate all of these really important microphone designs. Slate also made this super cool interface. It's a touch screen, basically like a touch screen mixing console in front of you. That's called the Slate Raven. Slate also makes really a lot of like educational and tutorial videos, and they make a ton of plugins.
Yeah.
That's what I know about Slate.
Yeah, no, that's all I know too.
So to answer the question, what is Slate? That's
right.
it. I mean, it's a guy, it's a company, it's a bunch of tools. It's a rock.
It's a rock. The only other thing I could say, I feel like we must have lost our internet here. But the other thing that's it probably is that. The other thing that Slate is, in a more of a technical sense, I think that the company exists only because of Steven Slate's name. But if you were to be making film, you've all seen every director use the little thing where they say take two and they smack the thing. That's actually called a slate. It's made of slate, and you use chalk to mark what take it is. And some of that exists in audio too. So just in case that question was about that, it could be
that's a good point.
Yeah, it could be like at the top of a take, you'd use a microphone and say, this is take two of whatever. And that could be a slate, technically.
They could have asked us, maybe it was a typo where they said, what is steak, but spelled it wrong twice.
It very well could be. It very well could be. It very well could be.
All right.
Okay, so to us, our screen looks a little weird. Do we sound okay? Can y'all still understand us?
Can you drop a
we'll
one
for yes and it? 2 for uh-oh. And while you guys do that, we'll queue up the next thing here. Do we want to move away from technical and into mastering?
What other technical did we miss?
Pan hi-hats. 1. Okay, good. Great. So it's just on our end. Perfect. We actually hit like some of these.
Yeah, I think we got pretty much all of them there.
Mm-hmm.
This one about, did we already do that? Okay, re-record.
We didn't do the re-record one.
We didn't.
This is actually a really interesting question we received about re-recording.
So this is kind of not so technical, back to like a little bit artistic stuff, but I want to make sure we hit it because it's kind of important.
And for some reason, my computer's not really exactly letting me search for it. But the question was generally, is it ever okay to re-record tracks as the engineer that you receive? Like, let's say you get a guitar part that doesn't sound good. Can you just go in and re-record the track yourself so that it fits better into the mix? Yeah. And we had a video response to this one
from Maria Lisa Ireby.
Yes.
Can I re-record?
Bad parts?
Can you play that, Loic?
Question number 1: is it okay if I re-record the guitar parts that are sloppy from a client's performance on my own? Unless you are being paid as a producer and or a performer, you should not re-record guitar parts. The reason is That is a different fee and entails a totally different responsibility than the ones we receive as mixing engineers or even recording engineers. If you are a mixing engineer and you receive a track that has been poorly recorded, it is your job and your responsibility to go back to the producer and let them know those qualities do not fit this standard you're required to get a good mix going. But nobody's paying for you to compensate from production sloppiness. That is a total different job and it has a totally different fee. If you think you can do them better yourself, then let them know, notify the artist and the producer, and charge accordingly. The most important part is to charge accordingly and also to receive the credits accordingly, because then the original performer will be getting those performance royalties from your work, and that is not fair.
Since tonight.
That
we're
totally
back.
makes sense. And I think
we just got a ton of questions in.
And the other part of that too is, you don't. It just kind of feels weird to step on someone else's creative vision if you re-record their track, even if you feel like you know what they were going for. It's their art, it's the artist's art, and I don't know that I would want to step on that. And that's my sort of layman's. I don't do a lot of recording, so that's my take on it. But yeah,
Totally.
So I think we should move to some mastering, since it's something we actually might have some authority to speak on. But this is a question that I get all the time. Do you get this question all the time?
I get, hey, what's the deal with loudness today?
Yes.
And this is always usually the answer.
This is always the answer.
Okay, so the question is, I hear engineers saying that they're going for minus 14 LUFS or whatever, which is pretty much it.
It's fair.
Well, that's fair. But I listen to commercial tracks all the time, which are way louder than that. Are these engineers bluffing? So here's the thing. You never really know where the mix is coming from or where the master is coming from level-wise. All we know is what we hear out in the world and what we can measure out in the world. And the problem is that every day, the companies that are sending this music, streaming tracks out into the world, are making decisions on the way that their software interacts with the loudness, and also the way that they accept loudness. So right now, like today, the target is minus 14 LUFS. But in order to say it's minus 14 LUFS, we have to even define what the fuck a LUF is. Okay? So LUFS is a way of describing a whole track, in my mind, a whole track about immediate loudness and average loudness and overall loudness. So immediate loudness by the second, immediate average loudness roughly by the few seconds, and overall loudness by measuring peak and the entirety of the track. And so that's different than those of you who are used to listening to stuff and measuring things in RMS, which is an average loudness over a few seconds.
Of acoustical
power. So LUFS is describing, it's a new thing that came out, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, became kind of a normal thing.
Nomenclature, yeah.
Yeah. And that stands for loudness units full scale. So that's also referring to a digital realm. And I've kind of lost my track. Dan, is there anything that you would add to that?
Well, so yeah, I'm very opinionated about this, and I don't agree with everybody. So just know that this is my opinion and not everybody else's. But I still don't use LUFS. I don't own a LUFS meter. I don't use it at all. It is not how my brain thinks about it as far as loudness goes. And to be quite honest, most of my clients I would get fired from if I delivered a master at minus 14 LUFS. It's just not loud enough for most of the stuff that I work on. Right. Now, that's to be said that it's not incorrect to say that delivering something at minus 14 is going to sound great. It's going to sound great. It's just not necessarily what everyone wants. Also, it doesn't mean it's going to sound great just because it's minus 14 LUFS. It's such a small part of the whole process. So no, the engineers aren't bluffing when they say make it minus 14 LUFS, but understand that as an engineer, your name, this is actually some advice I got from a previous boss of mine, but your name in a record is this big, right in the liner notes, and the artist name is this big. So whatever the artist wants, you do what they want, and whatever the producer wants, you do what they want. So I think definitely I would never push back on a client. If a client ever said to me like, I like it, I just want it a little bit louder, I might say like, I disagree. I think it'll sound better with a little less level, but here you go. Here's your louder master for you.
So the question being like, are these engineers bluffing when they're saying they're turning in stuff at minus 14? Yes and no, because we also have to remember what happens downstream.
Right.
Okay. So if I send a master in that is measured at minus 14 LUFS, which I don't think you do.
No.
Never like literally put it through a little tool that spits out like this is minus 13.6.
Yeah, I literally
LUFS.
don't
Like,
do that.
That's not a thing that we do.
No.
But I will sometimes like I'll check, or like we have VU meters sitting right in front of us, or I have PPM meters sitting right in front of me that are telling me what's happening. More than anything, I look at my little waterfall and that tells me when it turns white, it's too hot.
No one likes the white waterfall.
So the thing is, like, there is some responsibility that we all have to have, but we are run by many masters. And if the client says turn it in hotter, then we're going to turn it in hotter. And anybody says that, oh, I never send something in that's just at minus 14 exactly, they might say that, but they're not sending in that much work. They're not working that much.
And also, it doesn't mean anything to how it sounds. Like yes, things in a certain dynamic range will sound better. But for example, I had I watched something on, I think it was like a Facebook group about mastering, and someone showed their meter, and it showed that the LUFS was minus 7 or something, whatever that means, really high. And someone commented, well, I bet it doesn't sound very good. And you really don't know. You haven't heard the track. There is no correlation between good and level. Yes, you can find some if you probably did like massive averages, but for one individual track, there is nothing that correlates good with its level.
Right. And everything's relative too to other things that are happening.
Yep.
So the reason this whole minus 14 thing came along is because there was this story time. There was this period, this era, I guess, especially when you and I were coming up, called the loudness wars. And that was basically like people were making stuff louder and louder and louder because they thought that more like louder records would sell more. But then we got to this thing that happened called Death Magnetic.
Death Magnetic. I was gonna say it as a joke. I thought you were going somewhere else. Oh, that's
actually
funny.
You know what? I will say Black Eyed Peas.
Oh, yeah,
put
that's
out,
a loud
at that
record.
time the loudest record on record.
Interesting.
That's okay. But then Death Magnetic came out, and people really realized how bad, like crazy clipped out, loud, no air movement. Remember when we were talking just a few minutes ago about air moving around in the room? When stuff's way too loud, the speakers don't send that impulse. So when there's no dynamic range, the speakers are just doing this. They're not really moving the way that they're meant to be to move the air and then move our eardrums.
Yep.
They're just stuck like this. Then people get pissed off and they hit shuffle because they're always fatigued and angry because their eardrums aren't moving with the music because there's no dynamic range.
Yeah.
Minus 14 is a ton of room compared to where we were before. Okay. That's that's a huge gain for us in terms of our ability to make stuff sound good. And the thing that I think this comes from is why minus 14 is because a couple of years ago, Spotify, iTunes, Tidal, some of the bigger streaming companies instituted this thing called basically sound check, where if the sound, the LUFS average exceeds peak as well, exceeds minus 14 LUFS, they will turn that track or that album down.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And if it's too quiet, they will turn it up.
And it's not for sound quality. The whole reason for doing this was because they didn't want playlists to feel disjointed. They didn't want people reaching for their volume knobs, you know, when Lady Gaga is followed by like something quieter than
Jewel.
Lady Gaga. Jewel, there you go.
Or something that was made back in the 90s a lot quieter.
Right, exactly.
Than something made today.
Exactly.
Right?
And that was the whole reason for doing
this.
So
they said, okay, let's take everybody down.
Yeah. If the louds are getting louder, if we bring everybody down, it should all work out.
Then everybody's going to be all right.
Yep.
Okay? The problem is that you're right. The client is the one that pays our bills, and the client is always right.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, we have to be responsible about our reputation, but we can't always push back and say, no.
Exactly.
Do that.
Exactly. And the other thing to remember about LUFS is that it's a digital meter only, yes, which is important, but it's also not really a measure of level. Mm-hmm. It's a measure of loudness based on frequency, which has to do with Fletcher-Munson curves, which is basically the principle of that is that your ear hears low frequencies less well than it does higher frequencies at low volumes. It's really weird. As sound gets louder, you start to see this. Basically, if you're listening softly, these are your low frequencies here, and these are your highs. You're going to hear the highs first. As you turn up the volume, it literally does this. And all of a sudden, the lows now sound as loud as the highs.
But if there's a ton of dynamic range crunching and a ton of distortion, that high information at high levels becomes much more grating and fatiguing and less pleasing to listen to.
It does.
On top of the fact that streams, for the most part, are just shitty MP3s.
Right. Oh boy, now we're all worked up. We got us all worked up now.
All right, we can go down 2 hours.
But I will say for in general, here's what I do honestly every single day is if I have a project I'm doing, and let's say it's a pop country record, I work on a lot of pop country. I will literally play the hot country playlist on Spotify.
Pop country and not country pop.
Not country pop? I've never heard. Okay, well, pop country. I think it leans pop. But I will, like, as I'm setting up the session and doing some emails, I will play the hot country playlist on Spotify with no normalization. And that just gets my ears worked up to, like, where are the levels of most modern pop country songs. And by that point, I will EQ my song when I'm mastering it just to that level. I don't even look at meters. It's more like, how does it live with, next to other things that people are listening to? And I think that's a much more accurate meter than any sort of digital readout could be. But that's basically my answer on LUFS.
Right on.
I get this one a lot.
I think we can answer that really quickly.
We can.
Right.
It's kind of related.
Here's the question. Should I make different masters for streaming, CD, and vinyl as an independent musician who masters their music? Let's just take the vinyl one off the table.
Yep. Yes, for vinyl, but yeah.
Different master. Completely different master, completely different thing.
Yep.
If we had a window into that room, we could show you the lathe and everything that we do to try and make sure that vinyl sounds as good as it possibly can. And vinyl is a completely different animal that we're not even going to touch today.
That's fair.
Okay. Different masters for streaming and CD. No.
I agreed. Same answer is no. I think I've read a lot on the internet of people who say, oh, for streaming, I like to give, like we said, the minus 14 LUFS. But overall, at the end of the day, I firmly believe that as an engineer, you're not responsible for the listener's ability to listen to the music. Now, what I mean by that is you need to make something that sounds good on all systems, but if your listener is listening in a way that you feel is less than ideal, you shouldn't master for that listener. Instead, you put a really good sounding master out that will sound good on as many systems as possible, and let the listener have to work to make their playback correct.
Right.
That's my mentality.
The best analogy I heard for that is like that James Cameron didn't make Avatar to look good on this.
That's a really good,
right?
Yes, exactly. And it's also, it may seem easy to do, especially if you're working on a small number of projects. It's like, oh, it's no big deal. I'll just do this for this. But when people are paying you per minute that you're working or per hour, they're not going to want to pay for all those masters either. That's so much more listening. I mean, like both of us will, before we deliver a final master, give it a full listen. So if we had an hour-long album that was going to be released on mastered for iTunes, on Tidal, on Spotify, and on CD, if we did literally different masters for every single, which we do some, but if we did for every single thing, we would be spending 2 or 3 days just listening, and no client is going to want to pay for that amount of time for us to do.
Right.
So that's another reason we don't, but also just that you want a consistent product out there. You don't want a product to sound completely different on Spotify than it does on Tidal. That is kind of weird in general. Also ISR, I mean, to get real technical, not that anyone cares about ISRC codes, but they technically live with a recording. So if you have one recording that's a drastically different EQ and volume, that technically needs a new ISRC code. We can get onto that at another point.
Here, how about this
anyways,
one? Number 19.
Number 19.
So I think we already hit number 20.
I love this one.
All right.
This
I
is
like
a good
this one a lot.
Yeah, I'll let you do it first because my answer is simple.
Okay. Number 19. Is a subwoofer necessary for mastering? Yes, my dog Porter sits in the room for every single record that I master.
That's awesome.
So I used to have two different. I think that in my career I've had two different thoughts on this. I used to be one of those people that was like only audiophile, high-end, full range speakers, like no subs. Basically, subs introduce phase problems, subs introduce issues in the room, subs will mess up, will give you a false sense of understanding of what's happening. And then I mastered a record on my first system that had proper 15-inch subs, and I never looked back.
Interesting.
Yeah, super quick, I used to master records only on a pair of Focal Scala Utopias, and those are full range speakers, not unlike your B&Ws.
Yeah, they're nice.
Beautiful speakers.
Those are great speakers.
And I had mono block tube amps. I was like all about it. I had like everything. I worked to keep that system as beautiful as it possibly could be. And it all worked great until I moved mastering rooms. So then the system that I had didn't work anymore.
Why?
Because the room I was in previously when we designed that system and I was working and mastering records happily was a fairly high ceiling, long, narrow, skinny room from front to back.
Oh, that's a tough room for a sub, I bet. Got some big standing waves.
Would have been really weird with subs. So
Yeah.
this full range speaker sounded great. And also that type of speaker had a splatter tweeter. It had a beryllium splatter tweeter. When we went to the other room across the bay, my new mastering room was an expansion ceiling with a very wide and not very deep
room
listening space.
Right.
So now this splatter tweeter was interacting with the ceiling, and there
tons of
the
reflection.
speakers didn't put enough bass into the room to fill the room up.
Interesting.
So I started having serious problems. So I started looking into other speaker options, and I tried out this pair of Meyer speakers that had a 15-inch sub in the system, and it also had phase correction. And that was when I mastered some of the first records that I didn't have to work at all
on the low end.
Because I could actually hear everything. I could hear all the distortion. I could pump as much bass into the room as I wanted to,
and the room didn't care.
And the room didn't even care. So I will say it. If you are working in a room that needs a sub, use a fucking sub. If you're working in a room that can't handle a sub, don't use a sub. It's all about what information is coming at you as the engineer. Now that I have my PMCs, I can't imagine going back.
Yeah, you couldn't take out the bottom half.
But I do remember how wonderful it was and how beautiful of a listening experience it was to have just one full range speaker.
Yes. And that's actually my answer to the question is if we're going to leave the question at Is a subwoofer necessary for mastering? I have been doing it for 12 years and have never used a subwoofer. So no.
Right.
You
need
is
to get
the
a dog.
answer.
Get rid of your cats.
I have so many cats. But yeah, no, I don't think it is necessary at all. That being said, I do check my low end in a few other places than just my room. So maybe a sub would make me slightly more efficient, but I've never worked that way. And for me, I'm very comfortable with how it is right now. So I'm not willing to change yet. Yeah. But yes, so yes, depending on your situation, maybe it's great. Definitely not necessary.
I think we should answer one more question.
Okay.
And then I think we should take some questions from here.
I like that. I think that sounds like a great plan. What would your last question like to be? Like that one or like
Not that one. We already answered that one.
Yeah.
You pick.
I pick?
You pick, Dan. How do I keep my mixes
Actually, this
loud
one.
but not
I love
completely
this one.
squashed?
This is a great one.
That's the one. That's what I was thinking
That's
too.
perfect. So the question is, how do I keep my masters loud without feeling squashed?
So I believe in program dynamics.
You're just gonna tell them all our secrets now.
Sorry.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I believe in program dynamics where the intro, verse, chorus, verse, bridge, chorus, outro all have different values of loudness.
I agree with that 100%.
Some people in the world, Metallica being one, I don't believe that. I think that's important to keep in mind that there's two different types of loud. And keep in mind as well that you can't have loud without quiet. Loud is a relative
that's very true.
measurement. Loud is a relative observation. Okay? So if I scream into this microphone right now, you won't know how loud that is unless you know how loud I was talking previously.
It's true.
Right?
It's true.
So that's why that's how I think of program dynamics.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. And if you end up, this is to just piggyback, if you end up with a mix that is lacking in program dynamics, don't be afraid to change them. And what I mean by that is oftentimes I'll get a mix where someone's using a lot of compression on the mix bus and the verses feel very loud. And then the chorus hits and all of a sudden, you know what I'm talking about. If you have, the energy just kind of drops almost and it feels quieter, even though there's more going on in that chorus. And that's not what we want. And what you can actually do is I just make a hard edit right on the first kick of the chorus. And I lower the verse in just digital gain by could be as much as a dB if it's an extreme case. But even if you're wanting something just have a little more impact, if you just lower the verses and the bridge by 0.3 or 0.4 decibels, that will make it feel like there's a big transition into the chorus and the chorus will hit a lot harder. I think a lot of people, when they say hit harder, they reach for compressors and limiters. And really that's the opposite of what you want to do. What you want to do is create dynamic range in there. But another secret that I don't know if you do or not, actually, Piper, but I've just found that to keep dynamic range and punch without feeling crushed, I think that hitting converters really hard with level is the best way to do that. In my mastering chain, I use analog gain, and then I push that gain into a really good analog to digital converter at a really high level. And what I've found is it seems very counterintuitive. It seems like this breaks all the rules that you've read online about how you're supposed to make audio, but it preserves kicks basically by what you do. If you look at the waveform of that, a kick will come all the way to 0 and then it'll just get chopped off, right? And that seems really wrong. That's like, oh, I'm clipping my audio, I'm creating distortion. But if you think about what this speaker is doing, the speaker that you're working on can't go really fast and then stop immediately, right? What it's going to do is it's going to go really fast and just keep going because of inertia and the laws of physics. It's going to push forward and then come back. And so you're going to feel the impact as though that kick had the top of its range there, but it actually doesn't.
What a great way of explaining that. I've always thought about that, but I've never actually heard it in words. That's
Thanks.
awesome.
Thanks.
Wow.
Yeah. And to just go back to that too, as far as physical things, like if you hear a pop because of a bad edit, the pop doesn't actually exist. There is no pop in the audio. What's happening is, well, and what I think is really happening is that you're asking the speaker to do something impossible. So if you have an edit where one waveform ends at the top, and then you've made an edit and the next one starts at the bottom, you've asked the speaker to go from an out position to an in position literally instantaneously. And it can't do that, but it tries. So the speaker goes whoop in really fast, and you hear a pop because it moved an insane distance as fast as it could. But there's not actually a pop in the actual audio itself, but that's why you have to use crossfades when you're editing audio together. Anyways, I like to think about the physical world a lot when I'm like working in audio, even in the digital world. It just helps translate what's going on, because really the physical world is the only world we actually exist in. So that's where all of the decisions really need to be made sure are correct.
That's a lot. Thank you. That's I think about that all the time, of like when the audio hits 0,
Mm-hmm.
what happens afterward?
Yeah.
And I always think about the fact that the speaker keeps going.
Right.
But I didn't realize that anyone else thought that way.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
That's great. Okay, so what about a couple of questions now?
Okay, here's a perfect one.
I don't know.
Right off the bat. I've never heard the if in case you can't see it, but I'm sure you can. What do you think of SoundCloud's new mastering service? I'm going to guess that it is an automatic mastering service using some sort of algorithm. I have a long, like, sort of ethereal answer to this, but I think I want you to answer it because I think they're sick of me talking.
No, not at all. Well,
thanks. It's Vin.
Swan.
Swan.
So here's the thing about automatic mastering services. We are humans.
Mm-hmm.
We interact with the music in a very, like you said, physical way.
Mm-hmm.
And we have brains, and we can think, and we can communicate to you and back about what is happening in the music.
Oh, that's cool.
Machines, computers, mastering robots, which I actually bought recently, masteredbyrobots.com.
Nice.
Machines can't figure out what to do when there's a problem. All they know is what to do in a perfect situation, or a situation based on an input that they've been given.
Mm-hmm.
And I will also say that right now, and just because I know this almost intimately, and you know that I know this, there isn't really any technical AI mastering happening.
It's true. There's no neural networks involved, right? Oh, okay. I'm just going to not talk.
There's no technical AI mastering on the market right now.
Today.
Most of the automated mastering services that you'll find, which is how I like to describe them, not like AI mastering or robot mastering or whatever. It's like, it's an automated mastering service, because that's all it is. It's just not, it's more automated than someone calling our manager Raylan on our behalf and saying, please have Piper or Dan master this song. Right. And what happens is they're taking a set of values that they've been given to handle a certain situation, and then they're going to spit out a value at the end. My problem with that is that mastering is an art form, and it's about 3 things. Format conversion, so taking tape and putting it on lacquer, or taking high-res files and putting it on CD or vinyl. It is about the quality control process, so finding errors, fixing them, alerting the client or the label to the error.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about the end of the creative process and the beginning of the manufacturing process. None of those 3 things are handled by a fucking robot. Okay? None of them. Now, if you are a composer and you are trying to submit demos to different music libraries, and you have 100 tracks to master, are you going to pay me or Dan to master them for you? Probably not. If you are a songwriter and you're just working on little demos that are going to be shared with other songwriters for collaboration, and you need to submit them in a professional way, hopefully better at sounding than what you can make them yourself, are you going to pay me and Dan to master them in the analog domain? Probably not. If you are a person coming out of high school trying to work on a production career and you have literally no income, are you going to pay Dan or I to master your tracks? No. So I believe in automated mastering services for those few worlds that you can imagine would not be touching me and Dan's world. When it comes to putting us up against a machine, it's very, very difficult to beat a human being when it comes to the art, the sound, and the understanding of what needs to be mastered in a certain way for a certain format. A robot can't do it.
It's true.
What are your thoughts?
Well, so what I'm going to do is, I'm sorry, Morgan, I want to just briefly pass on the vinyl question, but what my answer to the AI mastering is actually very similar to Kate's question that she just asked. Kate Griffin asked, how do you approach the first time listening through a track that you're mastering? And so for me, my answer is actually kind of the same for this as it is for the question about AI mastering. And that is, I totally agree with Piper on all the three of those things. And for me personally, there's one other element to it, which is that we are making an art that is out for people to enjoy. And the most important thing for them to realize when they listen to this art is how it makes them feel emotionally. That's like what happens when you listen to music. Music is something that touches you in an emotional way, and that's the whole point of its existence. So I think that there is no way for a machine that's just analyzing frequencies to figure out what the emotion of that track is. And so to answer Kate's question, when I first pull up a mix, the very first thing that I do is I have nothing in. I have absolutely no gear, and I'm listening to the mix exactly as it was. And I listen to the song and don't listen to the audio quality. I mean, obviously I can't help it. I'm a human, but like I try not to listen to the audio quality, and I try to listen to the song itself and say, what emotion is the artist trying to tell me they want me to feel with this song? Or just how does this song make me feel? And then the question becomes, is the recording giving me that feeling? Like maybe there's a disjointed thing in this. Maybe the artist is giving me this very melancholy, very sort of cool feeling with the vibe and the lyrics, and I'm supposed to feel sort of just like a melancholy feeling, but there's all these shakers and hi-hats and loud kick drums, and it's taking me away from the feeling that the artist wants with that song. So the first thing I always try to decide is, what emotion is the artist wanting me to feel? Do I feel that emotion? And if I don't, how do I change this track to feel that emotion? And that's really when then the translation happens in my brain of, that emotion happens when I hear X, or this in this track is keeping me from hearing it. And that's how I approach it. Very not technical. And I am not really a technical person. Like I don't hear a track and say there's too much 80 hertz. I reach for a low frequency EQ and just start sweeping it around until literally I feel correct in it. If mixes are really good, I'm one of those really lucky people that feels goosebumps a lot for music. If something hits me in the right way, I get the goosebumps. And for really good mix engineers, I will literally just master it until I feel the goosebumps. And then I'm like, that's right. I don't think AI mastering will ever quite do that. I think that it will be able to, especially if it can get genre specific, I think it might be able to help some. But I think for the really high quality projects, you're always going to need a human to make sure that humans feel it the right way. And that is how I start all of my mastering when I start it.
I like that.
Oh, thanks. It's really true too. I'm not just giving you a bunch of like words, honestly.
All right. More questions. Oh, well,
We skipped one. Do we want to skip
did
vinyl?
Okay, vinyl.
We talked about maybe not doing vinyl. We could talk about it for hours. We want to give some like maybe just basic things about it. Okay.
Okay, first of all, show them that book.
Yes, if you are curious about vinyl cutting and like actually vinyl cutting, this book by Larry Bowden, The Basic Disc Mastering, is literally everything you could possibly need to know.
It's like, here's the thing that like totally struck me was that it was 52 pages of process and then like 200 pages of instructional manuals.
Yep, that's true.
Of like how lathes were built and all that kind of thing. All right, so Dan and I both master a lot of records for vinyl. We both have interacted with the vinyl world for a very long time, and we are not, I wouldn't say unicorns in terms of mastering engineers that work with vinyl, because there are a few of us, but we are not the norm in terms of mastering.
When she says works with vinyl, not like we make files to go to vinyl, but we have a lathe here and we actually cut lacquers that become records.
Right.
That's what working with vinyl is actually about.
And I've dedicated a very large chunk of my career to improving the quality of modern record pressing. So if you've ever bought a record from a store and got it home and it didn't sound very good, that's maybe, I mean, honestly, partially like just the difficulty of putting modern music on vinyl, but also maybe partially people not knowing what they're doing. So Dan and I both have been given this incredible opportunity to work for Infrasonic, which is a wonderful mastering firm that cares about vinyl and cares about lacquer cutting and cares about mastering for vinyl. And that's how one of the reasons why Infrasonic became such a wonderful, huge name, originally based out of LA, was Pete Lyman, our boss, is an incredible lacquer cutter taught by, again, one of the best lacquer cutters in the world, still alive, Richard Simpson. And they have put together this lathe, and they had a couple of other lathes originally before they left LA. And Pete decided to move this one to Nashville. Okay, so that kind of brings us up to like what's going on. What, Dan, is a lathe?
So the basic, there's a few ways to make vinyl records, and it all starts with cutting the very first thing. Well, a lathe technically is
go
just
get the things.
Nope. Yeah, that's a good idea. A lathe technically is just a rotating machine, a machine that works on torque and could be used to machine metal parts. You could do all kinds of things with it. But in vinyl, what it means is basically there is a rotating disc of some sort made of different materials, which we'll go through, and then a needle or a stylus that will move across the disc and cut or etch into the disc one single groove that becomes the audio that you listen to when played back on a vinyl record player.
It starts out flat.
If we're doing acetate as the way we're doing it. Okay, yeah.
Okay, fair.
But it still starts out flat, I guess, either way. It still starts out flat. But this is an acetate.
A vinyl master is that. It is a blank lacquer physical thing that had the grooves of the audio cut into it. That is a vinyl master. So whenever somebody says they're mastering for vinyl, the first question you should have for them is, okay, so you cut lacquer?
You cut lacquer, yep.
That's different, okay? So lacquer starts out as this. It's very, maybe a little difficult to see.
It's like a mirror.
It's basically like an M&M.
Yeah. Yeah,
okay?
it is, actually.
It's a piece of metal that has a hole cut in it.
It's aluminum or steel. I can't remember.
I think it's aluminum.
Aluminum? Yeah, that sounds right.
And aluminum that gets run under a curtain of paint, lacquer.
Yeah,
like
nitrocellulose acetate
like
is technically what it is.
It's like nail polish.
It's nail polish. It's literally nail polish.
It's like an M&M that's been run under. And so then you end up with this very clean, sheer top.
They're quite beautiful, honestly.
And just like in a nail polish, when you stick your other fingernail into it and it creates this dent, that's kind of what happens here.
It's exactly what happens.
And over time, a very short time in this case, like 24 hours
Mhm.
in this case, that dent starts to collapse back in on itself. So now you take over.
Yeah. So what your goal is with this acetate is, yeah, no problem, or lacquer, as
Because
some
this is
people
a
call
lot
it.
of money.
The goal is to cut the signal into this very soft material using a stylus, which is normally made out of sapphire if you're cutting into acetates. And then that disc, as quickly as possible, because it erodes over time, gravity, dust, literally everything ruins this thing. So you want to very quickly take that acetate to a plating facility. And what the plating facility does is they'll wash your acetate, then dump it into a bath of water with nickel pellets in it. And I'm sorry?
Silver.
Oh, do you silver it before you do that? Or is this the silvering? I actually don't know. Oh, see, no stupid audio questions even for me.
Basically, they wash it really, really well a couple times. And then they spray a bunch of silver on it, which helps to adhere.
That'll make it more electrically charged.
It charges it,
yeah.
and it
You're
basically,
right.
it's ionized silver, so that gets into all of the little nooks and crannies.
Exactly.
And then that reacts with the nickel.
So you take the silver, put it into the water, whatever weird solution bath, along with the nickel pellets, and you apply a charge to it. And what that does is it makes the nickel come off the pellets and adhere itself to the disc.
Right. So just like in Who Framed Roger Rabbit,
It's just
when the villain falls into that vat.
yeah,
it's
exactly. That's exactly what it's like. And then at that point you have a nickel version of the record, and I actually can't remember if that one's positive or negative.
It depends on how many copies you're going to make, because
there's
it
different
becomes a
processes
mother
with that.
or a father. It's very weirdly patriarchal. I don't like it, but it is what it is.
Audio kind of is. We have like male and female XLRs. It's weird.
know.
Anyways, so you end up though with a metal version that you can make harder metal versions from that
Right.
become stampers that go into an actual vinyl press.
Right.
And then at the vinyl, once you get to the pressing stage, one stamper can make many records. It will wear out, but it can make like 500, 1,000. And this one stamper basically takes these pucks of PVC,
Which is like soft.
It's
At
like
this point,
heated.
it's
It's like
heated.
super heated PVC. And a record press will take these two metal stampers and squish the PVC in between them, and that makes the PVC expand across all of them. It's if you should really watch it on YouTube if you haven't, because it's really cool. But it crushes all the PVC through. Then all of a sudden you end up with a record that has all the same grooves as the two metal stampers, except 180 degrees out of polarity.
Which is the same as the lacquer that we cut.
Exactly. Which ends up being exactly the same as the lacquer that we cut. Well, as same as it can be. And then a knife goes around the edge and cuts all the excess PVC vinyl off, and you end up with a record after it cools.
That's right. It's like making waffles.
It is like, yeah, it is. It's actually exactly what it's like. Just a fun fact for y'all, in case you didn't know, the sticker on a vinyl record is not a sticker. It's actually a heat-activated piece of paper. So that is embedded in the press when the heat gets on it and it presses that record. The paper is physically adhered. It's why you can't peel it off and see like an adhesive or anything like that on it.
And when we recycle records, we actually dink out. It's called a dinker. We
gets
dink
out
out
that
the
middle.
center,
That makes sense.
and then we regrind the records, and then use that plastic.
That totally makes sense. There's one other way to make them, not to get on vinyl for too long, but there's one other way, which is called direct metal mastering. And that, now, it gets a lot of flack now, but if you remember, like Abbey Road and all of the lathes in England had direct metal mastering. Beatles records were cut on direct metal mastering, so they must sound okay if you do it right. But that is a little different. You cut into actual copper discs first, directly into metal.
What would be the father?
Which would be the father, right?
Sorry, no, wait.
Or
That would be the mother, because then they make the metal negatives from
the
that.
negatives are the father.
So that
right?
would be the
that
mother.
make
That would
sense.
be the mother.
I actually don't know what stylus they use for that. We use sapphire for acetates. I don't know if it's diamond.
It's gotta be
diamond. What else could cut through copper? And in general, there's some advantages. I'm honestly not an expert on it. There's like 2 direct metal mastering lathes in all of the United States. So it is very, very rare here. But it still happens in Europe, and especially in Eastern Europe. There are a lot of plants that still use
It's a good way of cutting costs and cutting a little bit of turnaround time. And a lot of times it's described as like a closer version to the master. But the problem is that that stuff ends up not sounding as full and organic and real as a vinyl or a lacquer cut record. I hear like a little bit of extra high frequency, a little bit of weird phasing stuff going on because the resolution of that metal is not quite what I would want it to be the way that it is on a lacquer. And I hear like a ringing almost, like a metal ringing. I can't tell. Like, I don't know if something was mastered on DMM or on lacquer. I don't know.
Yeah, I
have
know
had
either.
stuff that I've mastered in the digital realm sent to DMM, and I just don't think it sounds
Not
as
as happy
good
with it.
as lacquer cut.
That was a lot of vinyl.
Woohoo!
We got a few other questions come in here. Let's see. So we have this one. So Caleb asked about specifically Drake and OVO mixes.
Well, I don't know because I've never heard those mixes.
I haven't either. I'm sorry. They sound great though. I mean, if they sold a lot of records,
sound like
they probably
this.
sound pretty good. And to Josh's
What's
question,
that meme? Like, yeah,
oh yeah, what is that guy? Yeah.
that's Drake.
Oh, is it Drake on? Oh yeah, from that music video where he's like all in the colors.
We don't
and
get
that.
out
Yeah.
enough.
We sit in this room a lot. To Josh's question though, just really easily, would you say you listen to it like a producer? Exactly. Yes. That is exactly right. Because the person I'm trying to make happy is the producer, right? That's the person that is going to approve this if it's not the artist. But if it's the artist, it's kind of the same thing. And am I giving them what they want specifically? Yes, exactly right.
All right, a couple more questions if anyone wants, and then I think we'll start to wrap this up.
Yeah. Does anyone have anything
Anything else you want to throw in there? We can go.
We do have more.
We have like, we maybe hit a third of the actual questions we have.
We have a lot.
Woof. How to listen to ear training exercises.
Oh,
We
I
kinda
like
hit
this.
that a little bit.
Well, where is that one?
That's number 52. 52 actually.
Yeah. Do you have advice in terms of how to listen? Ear training exercises.
I never used like the golden ears.
I did not either.
Or anything. I was sat down in front of a good sounding system with good sounding records, and my mentor said, listen to this. And they said, okay, what do you hear? And Swan said it earlier here about like taking an inventory of what you're hearing in the sound. And basically like that was how I was taught. I was taught to sit down. The first things that you hear are you're making decisions about them, and they're kind of washing over you almost like a Zen meditative process. And you're hearing like, okay, this song has kick drum, snare drum, hi-hat, rack tom, floor tom, splash cymbal, ride cymbal, 2 guitars that I can hear, a lead vocal, backup vocals, 3 stacks of backup vocals, all that stuff. And you're just taking this like inventory as it's washing over you. And so the way that I think about that now is that I'm listening to that going like, okay, these are things that I've noticed. This is what they sound like. I'm not making any judgments on it. I'm just taking it in. And then when I go to master this song, how do I not hurt those things?
Yeah.
The only way that I don't hurt them is that I know what they sound like to begin with. Maybe I make them better. Cool. But for the most part, at least I have an inventory of what's there, so I'm not going to fuck it up.
I think that's, exactly. I wouldn't add or change anything to that. We've had 2 more questions come in.
Oh, look at that.
This one from Josh is, what is your opinion about color in mastering? And I assume you mean gear that adds sort of an audio color to the sound. But if you're not, please feel free to specify more specifically. But what do you think about colorful gear?
Well, I personally think that it's not my place to put color on someone's music. But there are some pieces of gear that you can't get that sound from any other piece of gear that happens to also a byproduct is color. That would be like I'm looking over there, like the Very Mew.
The Very Mew or the NIF EQ.
The NIF EQ, I think, sounds like a color.
Yep.
Totally.
That's how I use my Manly. Very similar.
Yeah. Do you have a Master Pass?
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. I need to borrow that sometime.
Anytime.
Okay. Some of the Manly gear, of course, like is one of those benchmarks. Ivana has made some of the most incredible mastering and recording gear, and it just has a sound, and that's fine. It's a desirable sound. It sounds awesome. But a lot of times the client isn't necessarily paying for us to master our color into their sound, but
Right.
it's a byproduct. So that's my answer, I guess.
Yeah, and for me, the color is I almost always use when something is missing from a mix. I feel kind of back to that emotional thing I was telling you about. If a mix is supposed to make me feel sort of cold and in this like sort of like darker place, then if the mix doesn't have that, I have some pieces of gear that I feel when I put them in just give me that feeling. So yeah, it's about trying to use the color to make a mix what I think it wants to be, more than it is like, oh, this always sounds good, so I put it in on the master. That definitely don't do that.
Yeah.
It is more about using the colors. Sometimes EQ isn't enough. For example, there is occasionally I'll get a track where the bass guitar is plenty loud, but the kick just isn't pumping through. For whatever reason, the kick feels weak. And I could try to do some crazy EQs, maybe some mid-side stuff and like specific frequencies for the kick and bass, but all of that makes the relationship feel weird. And I have a Millennia compressor that I use all the time, and I never actually compress with it. I just pass the audio through it. And for whatever reason, it makes kick energy come through without affecting the bass guitar. I don't know why. I don't care why. I put it in and it works. And so that's how I would use color, is for things like that. Also, like, shout out to my dad.
My mom
Thanks for
called me
chilling
while
with
we were on
us.
this call.
That's so fun.
I like to use compression as my my EQ. A lot of
yes.
times, because when you shape the transients, the byproduct is an equalized sound.
Mhm.
Like it's when you shape slower transients, the EQ of those higher frequencies isn't even able to come through. So you're almost like filtering the EQ with the compression. Okay, a couple of other ones. Preferred DAW. I like Reaper. Colby asks, what's your preferred DAW? I personally like Reaper because it lets me capture the sound that I want, and it sounds great, and it's really flexible, and it always starts, and it always works, and it's really customizable. I have used every single mastering DAW that's ever been made for mastering, and I used Soundblade for the first 7 or 8 years of my career, and then I only moved into Reaper by necessity, but I was trying to use Sequoia, which you use.
Which I use.
And the computer system that I was on wasn't having it, so we had to revert to Reaper, which I kept going back to Reaper and going like, wow, this just works. It sounds great.
That's really cool. That's really cool. Yeah. I mean, for me, it's
I like Wavelab a lot too.
But... Yeah. And Wavelab I use every day with Pete here at Infrasonic. He uses Wavelab. I am a Sequoia user. For me personally, it's because it's I really like the way it handles. That sounds so nerdy. I really like the way it handles delay compensation. The way that Sequoia does it, it sends out a blast every single time you hit play, and it actually physically reads the delay compensation of all of your plugins and all of your analog loop, and it matches it and makes it work in that moment. And I really love that. It also handles all of the things I could possibly need it to do, making DDPs for CD. The way that it does plugins, I really like. I can put them on clips. I can put them on tracks. I can use it very versatilely. And there's nothing for mastering that I can't do in it. Literally not one thing. And I started on Sadie when I worked at my first job.
Too.
Oh man, I'm sorry. So we might need to drink over that someday. But Sadie was basically set up very similarly to Sequoia in that it did all the same things with a very track-based, very Pro Tools-esque feel as far as tracks and whatnot. And Reaper has that too, whereas Wavelab does not. It feels very stereo in Wavelab. I feel like I'm stuck in like
Wavelab is very Soundblade.
And it's not better or worse. It's more just how your brain prefers to work with audio. And since I worked with Sadie, Sequoia was an easy fit, as was Reaper with yours. Sequoia is a bear on your computer. And it is very expensive.
And it only runs on PC.
It only runs on PC, and you need a big PC to do it. Yeah. Actually, I would say as a just really quick advice, learn to build computers.
Oh
It's
God,
really
you'll
easy.
never be out of work.
It's really easy, and you can make awesome computers for way less than half the cost. So I've built 6 or 7 of my last mastering computers, and I've never bought one for it. So and I'm not like a computer nerdy like person. It's not that hard. I would look online how to build a computer and do that. It will save you so much money.
Okay, a couple more. I'm just gonna answer really fast. I'm sure you can too in one word. I don't know. Dan's asking. I don't know if you have already covered it. What format from high res?
24-bit, yeah. Whatever your
at
highest format is.
High res. Yeah.
I actually don't find a lot of benefit in 32-bit files.
Totally.
Personally, yeah.
Totally.
I think working in 32-bit is great. Doing your processing in 32-bit is great. You don't really get any benefit. There is enough headroom in a 24-bit file to like blow up the earth. And you can look that up. It's actually true. So there's no reason that you need more bits with 32-bit personally for me.
All right, a couple more. Swan is asking, what are some of your go-to plugins you always use in mastering? I like the Leapwing stuff. I like FabFilter. I like Waves.
FabFilter, and as it's something I use all the time, the universal modeling of the API 2500.
Yes.
Love that.
No, UA one?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I like the Waves one.
I just don't have it. I'm sorry. I just
I'll
don't
get it.
own it.
You can have
Okay,
it.
I meant the
I'll get
Waves
it for you.
version of the 2500.
I think it sounds better. They did better. They did a better job with the release timing.
I believe you. I would like to check it out. And also limiter wise, I do something that I think everyone should do. If you work in the analog world and you go to analog and then print back to digital, my print track has literally like 10 different limiters on it. I have Ozone, I have Pro L2, the regular L2 from Waves, some like the Limitless,
That one's good.
the free one from this guy named Vlad in Russia, limiter number 6, is actually really cool. Works really well.
Putin's getting into plugins?
It seems very anti-Putin the way he designed the plugin, but yeah, it's great. And
It's a good band name though. Anti-Putin.
anti-Putin. And the AOM invisible limiter. So basically I have all of those on one track and I pop each one in and out, and you'll find that they will all sound it's a little bit different on the track that you're mastering. And again, for me, it's like which one feels like the track. Also a secret one people don't know a ton about, the Xenon PSP limiter.
Putin's.
Putin's. The Xenon the Xenon, what is it called? The Xenon limiter by PSP is awesome. Check it out. It's not that expensive and it's really good.
Yeah.
But yeah.
A couple more, and then we are gonna jump off here to save Louis.
Oh, this isn't it. This is like a very specific one.
You're trying to do that thing.
I do that thing again.
Okay. Monitor controller off a FireWire interface. You want to run the controller and interface from the desktop PC separately. Any tips?
Actually, I didn't quite read all of it. I'm not sure how to answer that question. My question would be, why do you want to run it that way? I am assuming that run the controller to a different interface. We'll be getting a new one for my desk. Any tips? Oh, you want tips on what interface? Sorry, I'm not exactly sure what you're asking.
I almost said the words. I almost said the bad words.
What was the bad word?
It depends.
It depends. Oh, we said we're not going to say it depends today. That's not something we're doing.
Okay, so how much do you want to spend?
Yeah.
That's the biggest question. If you want to spend between $200 and $500, then the Cubase interface, and also depending on how many tracks you want to record or input or output. But if you want to just do stereo, the Cubase interface, Steinberg, is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Focusrite, the little Scarlett is awesome. If you want to spend between $500 and $1,000, Apollo's
great. They're all great.
The Apogee. If you want to spend between $1,000 and $2,000, then anything made by RME. If you want to spend between $2,000 and $4,000, then Metric Halo. If you want to spend between $4,000 and $6,000, then Radar.
And if what you're asking is specifically the controller, like you want a separate controller from your PC just for your monitoring, I would say the Crane Song.
Yeah. The Avocet. Yep.
The Avocet. And like for both of us, we use the monitor sections of our mastering console,
Transfer console.
which is not necessarily feasible for everybody. But I would say the Avocet from Crane Song, the Grace makes some really good monitoring
Grace
things.
makes a great monitor controller.
And that's kind of all I've got that I've ever experienced.
I mean, Dangerous makes.
Dangerous, of course.
decent
Yeah,
one,
no,
too.
Dangerous.
Yeah.
Dangerous is a great monitor controller too.
Okay, what else? I think that brings us to our end. What do you think?
I mean, my drink's gone, so
Okay, and I have to pee. So.
The light is gone.
Wait, Look's in the dark.
Look, do you want to talk for a minute and I can use the bathroom and then we can come back and keep talking?
I have to
Yeah,
turn
go.
the lights.
Don't end without me.
We
Okay,
won't
I
end
won't
without
end with you.
Everyone else hanging around for Piper. I'm looking. There's 22 people right now.
There's 22 people. They've been coming and go. Some of them have been sticking around for almost 3 hours. So thank you, everyone. Drop a 1. Please drop a 2 if you really enjoyed the conversation so far. Want to make sure you loved the conversation, the laid back feel, all the knowledge that Dan and Piper dropped for over 2.5 hours. Dan, Colby is not going anywhere until the stream ends.
Right. That's the right attitude.
And that's the right. I'm going to put it here. I don't know if it's going. Oh, it's going to show up here on my side. So, well, Dan, you build computers, you master records. What is it that you don't do?
I like to dabble in a lot of things. Don't ask me to draw a picture. I'm terrible at that. My handwriting looks like a 4-year-old, so you know.
We're gonna wait for Piper to close, but there's still a lot of questions that haven't been answered. Correct?
Yes, and we have a lot as well. Yeah,
Okay.
in our spreadsheet.
So what probably drop a 1 if you want us to come back at some point to answer the remaining questions and maybe any new questions. Also, I would like to say that I was drafting the email. I will send you the link as soon as we end the podcast. It will be available for VOD and we'll leave it there. I may need some help to tag, but I'd love to actually do a call to the people who watch. If you hear me, you must be hearing me. I'd love, because you asked so many questions, and now I think YouTube lets you timestamp the moment where the questions are asked. And I think it would be really cool to start breaking down, each question on the timestamp. And I would love some help because that's going to be a lot of work to go through 2.5 hours. But anyway, closing statement. Dan, Piper, thank you so much for doing this. I hope you have fun. It looks like everybody was having fun. They dropped once. How do we close this? How do we say goodbye? How do we send people to bed?
Say thank you to Loic and Music Expo for hosting all of this.
This was a lot of fun for us. We had a lot of fun together, putting it together, and we had a lot of fun here doing it.
This is awesome. And you still have a lot of questions, so we can do it again and probably multiple times. So I'm going to ask everybody to make sure I'm going to do the typical YouTube thing. Don't forget to hit that bell button and subscribe to the channel if you want to stay up to date. There's also a video with Piper during one of our events in I think in September, talk about mastering and transient in mastering. I dropped a clip on IG which was well received, but the full video is also available on our channel, so go check it out because there's a lot of nerdy stuff in it. So if you didn't have enough tonight, I'm looking. Caleb, if you didn't have enough, you can go, or Colby, you can go watch that video for another 2 hours. And Dan and Piper, thank you so much. You have a good night. Go refill your drink, or maybe go home by now.
We're going back to work. No.
We're going back to work. Okay. Well, go back to work. Thank you so much, and we see you around. And on this, I want to say thank you for everyone. I have basically Colby close for us, And
you guys, thank you for all of your attention. It was so cool to see that the numbers stay the entire time.
Yeah.
It was so cool. Thanks for all of your attention.
And thank you for your kind words. It's awesome.
And Loic and Hannah as well. Hannah is always a wonderful support for all the work that Loic does. And thanks to Infosonic. And thanks, dude.
Yeah, thanks, Piper. Thanks, Loic.
No, thank you. And we'll be back at some point. All right. Bye, everybody.
See you guys later.